After I travel through the book, I can get 10 times the return. I warn you, if you dare to come to my senior brother's place next time, I will beat you every time I see you. The cold and angry voice rang in her ears. Xin Yun gradually regained consciousness, feeling dizzy, as if she was dreaming and waking up, and waves of pain swept through her body. She opened her eyes a little and looked forward. A beautiful girl in white ancient costume was holding a long whip and glaring at her. Xin Yun was a little confused. She shifted her sight. She saw many boys and girls wearing the same clothes as the girls, as well as some quaint buildings. Xin Yun fell into deep thought. Who am I? Where am I? What is this doing? Okay, senior sister Yun beat me well. That's how it should be. It's so refreshing. She comes here every day to pester senior brother Yu, but she doesn't even know how much she weighs. She has no shame. Look at her, she deserves it. Xin Yun had a question mark on her forehead. She wanted to ask, but she felt black in front of her eyes. Her body fell to the ground uncontrollably, and her consciousness returned to darkness. It was evening when she woke up again. Xin Yun opened her eyes and looked around in the bright red sunset light. A simple, antique room with a few wooden furniture. Their hand in the quilt pinched the tender flesh on her waist and pinched it lightly. Hiss. It hurts, it's not a dream. So, the extra memory in her mind is not fake. Did she really travel through time? The scene she saw before fainting flashed through her mind, and Xin Yun couldn't help but sigh. Travel through time, or travel through a book. The title of the book is The Devil Returns. It is a story about a righteous genius who becomes a waste. When he is at his lowest point, he sees the warmth and coldness of the world. After turning to the devil path, his cultivation level soars. Then he conceals his identity and returns, pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger to overturn the cultivation world, and by the way, he wins a group of beauties. The original owner was the licking pursuer of the Righteous Genius Limited Edition male protagonist in the early stage. Later, when the male protagonist fell into poverty, she changed her pursuer's attitude and stepped on him a few times. The result is that the male protagonist who counterattacked and returned had his cultivation level abolished, was thrown into the devil's cave, and died of humiliation. I didn't feel anything when I read the text. The villain is a catalyst for the protagonist's emotions, a necessary thing. But it's embarrassing to be the villain in this world. Can you send her back? Hey, are you awake? The questioning sounded together with the footsteps. Xin Yun shifted her sight and looked over. Then she saw a chubby girl of the same age walking in. The girl's name is Li Qing, Xin Yun's neighbor and her only sister in this sect. Seeing her eyes open, Li Qing picked up the teapot on the table, filled a cup of water, and walked over. Want some? Thank you. Xin Yun supported herself on the bed with her elbows, endured the pain in her body and sat up, and took the teacup. It's cold. But she was thirsty at this time, so she couldn't care less. Put it to her lips and sip it, moistening her lips, and then taking a small sip of water into her throat. Li Qing turned and walked to the cabinet on the side. I'll take the resource share distributed by the sect this month for you. Put it in the cabinet first, okay? The girl flipped her hand, and 10 grey-white jade stones and 3 small bottles appeared in her hand. She opened the cabinet door and put them in. Thank you for your trouble. Xin Yun thanked her. Then the girl turned around and picked up a small bottle in the cabinet, closed the cabinet door and walked back. Take off your clothes if you can move. I'll apply medicine for you. Thank you. Xin Yun put down the teacup, adjusted her posture to face the bed, unbuttoned her clothes and pulled them down. Please take care of the back, I'll do the front myself. Okay. Li Qing answered while opening the small bottle, pointing the bottle mouth at the whip marks on Xin Yun's back, and sprinkled the powder. The powder touched the wound, bringing a tingling sensation. Xin Yun pursed her lips to hold it back and didn't say a word. On the contrary, Li Qing behind her said in a bad tone. Yunsi, you really dared to attack such a severe whip wound. Xin Yun said nothing. By the way, I heard from the senior brother who sent you back that you didn't see senior brother Yu this time, and you were intercepted by Yunsi Yu. Yeah. At this time, the male protagonist has not fallen into the trough, and he is holding the script of Genius of the Right Path. As a pursuer, she pursues the male lead and often pesters him, giving him things she has but he doesn't need. Because of this, she has a bad reputation in the sect and is often scolded. A toad wants to eat swan meat, not knowing how high the sky is and how deep the earth is, shameless, and so on are all labels on her. Thinking of this, Xin Yun's expression is complicated. Let's not look at the development of the plot later, just talk about now. A young girl, what can't she do? Why waste her best years on someone who is not suitable? Well, let her junior sister, one of the legitimate concubines, teach her a lesson. But Li Qing's angry voice sounded. It's too much. That young guy simply doesn't take the sect rules seriously. After she finished speaking, she stopped spreading the medicine. It's done on my back, I'll give it to you. Yes. Xin Yun took the small bottle and lowered her head to sprinkle the powder. Li Qing sat down on the bed and sighed. But after all, her father is the leader of the sect, and the rules are set by her family. And we are just little disciples with no power and influence, we can't afford to offend him. Xiao Yun, remember to avoid him next time you go to see senior brother Yu. We can't beat him, but we can avoid him. When you succeed in taking down senior brother Yu, I wonder what she can say. Xin Yun's hand movements could not help but stop. Did you hear that? Li Qing saw that she didn't speak, so she emphasized. Xin Yun took a deep breath and spoke solemnly. I decided not to go there again. It was the original owner who liked the male lead, not her, so why bother to be annoying? Since she came here and couldn't go back, she had to live a good life, and the first step to live a good life was to stay away from the plot, away from right and wrong, and away from the protagonist. In this way, she could avoid herself, the villain, from the cruel ending in the plot. Li Qing was stunned for a moment, and suddenly jumped up from the bed. Why? Xiao Yun, are you serious? I told you a long time ago that you are good looking, much prettier than Yun Siyu, so you have a great advantage. As long as you keep persisting, senior brother Yu will see your good sooner or later. If you give up now, what's the point of all your efforts before? We have known each other for a year, and I can see that you really, really like senior brother Yu. This love should not end here. Xin Yun raised her eyes. But I think. Ding, system loading completed. Using this system, the host will get 10 times the return for anything given away. The system is bound to the only gift target, Yu Chenan. Xin Yun. System. Is it the system she thought it was? And Yu Chenan behind? The male protagonist. What do you think? Li Qing asked with a frown. I think Xiao Qing, you are right. Don't worry, I won't give up. Xin Yun said seriously. Sincerity can move mountains and open rocks. I will definitely let senior brother Yu see me. Chapter 2, Tenfold Return System. Using the excuse of being physically weak and needing rest, she sent Li Qing away. Xin Yun turned around and closed the door tightly. Taking a deep breath, excitement appeared on her face. System. Are you there? Can you explain this tenfold return in detail? When the host gifts items to a target, the system will return the items. The returned items will be randomly multiplied by 10 in terms of both quality and quantity. In other words, if I give the male lead 1 million, I'll get 10 million back, right? Correct. Xin Yun's eyes instantly lit up. Is there a problem with being a devoted person? Is there a problem with being mocked? With 10 times the benefit in front of her, there is no problem. Xin Yun suddenly felt that entering this book wasn't that bad after all. With a hint of excitement, Xin Yun walked toward the only cabinet in the room. Since she had to give something, she first needed to check what she had. She opened the cabinet. First, she saw a few simple clothes, some small accessories, and a dozen pieces of gold and silver. These were ordinary items with little value in the cultivation world, so after a quick glance, Xin Yun shifted her attention to the side. There were the spirit stones and pills that Li Qing had brought for her. 10 low-grade spirit stones, 2 bottles of spirit reserving pills, and 1 bottle of chi recovery pills. In addition to these, she still had 3 bottles of high-level spirit reserving pills that Li Qing had bought for her to give to the male lead but were intercepted by Yun Siyu before she could deliver them. Xin Yun picked up the spirit stones and pills, placed them beside the bed, and then pulled out 3 small bottles from her clothes, placing them on the bed as well. She searched her memory. These were indeed all of her assets. Xin Yun tilted her head and carefully recalled. The original owner was born in a small, ordinary mortal town. Her parents were small vendors, running a stall selling small jewelry. Life wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. The original owner was extremely beautiful. This was indisputable in both the original text and the original owner's memories. Thus, she became famous in the town from a young age. After turning 10, many people came to propose to her. The original owner had no interest in any of them. Until the age of 14, when the Xianling sect held its once in 10 years disciple recruitment, and the original owner was found to have spiritual roots in the water, wood, and fire elements. This marked her entry into the cultivation world and led her to meet the male lead, which ruined her life. The original owner had been in the Xianling sect for almost a year. Aside from bringing a few pieces of gold and silver from home in the beginning, the rest had come from the sect's monthly distribution of resources. These items were not many and could only ensure the basic needs of a chi refining stage cultivator. So the original owner chose to accept tasks, helping with some spirit materials at the alchemy peak. Then, she exchanged the earned spirit stones and the sect's distributed resources for items the male lead needed and sent them to him. Her own cultivation had relied mostly on effort, and as a result, she had not accumulated much wealth. Isn't this pure madness? What man is worth degrading yourself like this? Xin Yun's blood pressure surged, but she suddenly thought of the system. Oh, I still have to give it away. Well, no problem then. The male lead is worth it. Seriousface.jpg. Pulling her thoughts back, Xin Yun turned her gaze outside. It was still early, as it was only nightfall. She packed up the remaining items on the bed, sat down on it, and crossed her legs, adjusting her spiritual energy to heal her injuries. The medicine she had used earlier was bought with silver, not spiritual herbs. It had some effect, but not much. What mattered most was its decent pain-relieving properties, which helped reduce the burden. As for healing, there were no healing pills around, so she could only use her spiritual energy to nourish the area and promote natural healing. Time passed quickly. By the time the moon was directly overhead, Xin Yun opened her eyes. She first checked her injuries. They had scabbed over and were no longer swollen and bloody. After getting up to move around and confirming that her movements wouldn't be affected, she changed into a clean set of clothes and quietly sneaked out of the room. It was time to test the system. As the male lead was a direct disciple of the sect leader, his residence was naturally special. It was located on the sect leader peak, in a private bamboo grove. Xin Yun spent an hour carefully avoiding others before finally arriving outside the bamboo grove. According to the original owner's multiple experiences of sneaking in, Xin Yun made several turns and after some time, a 2-story bamboo building appeared in her view. She didn't rush over. Looking at the closed door of the bamboo building, she narrowed her eyes for a moment. Then, she spoke in her heart. System, let me ask, how do you determine the gift success? Is it only considered successful when I give something and the target accepts it? Or is it successful as long as I give it, regardless of whether the target accepts it? To successfully gift an item, the target must accept it. Xin Yun lightly exhaled and leaned against a bamboo stalk. System, your criteria are flawed. Giving is one person's action, and receiving is another person's action. How can these two be judged the same? You are my system, responsible for me alone. Your criteria should be based on my actions, not how others behave. So, determining success based on whether I have given is the right approach. Don't you think so? The mind was quiet, and the system didn't answer. Xin Yun smiled and straightened her back, walking forward. System, you must have come to this world with me, right? We are both strangers in this foreign land, and I believe you are responsible for me as your host. So, I'm not going to be polite with you. If there's a problem, I'll raise it, and you don't need to be polite either. If there's a problem, fix it. We need to cooperate, so we can carve out a world in this foreign realm. Don't you agree? As she spoke, Xin Yun had already arrived at the door of the bamboo building. She placed all the items she had prepared on the ground and then turned to leave. The original owner had often sent things this way, as the male lead wouldn't accept items if given face to face. This was also why Xin Yun had tried to persuade the system this way. As she took about 10 steps away, a prompt sound mixed with some dissatisfaction from the system rang out. Ding, gift successful. Tenfold effect, 2 bottles of low-level spirit reserving pills, 1 bottle of low-level chi recovery pills, 30 bottles of high-level spirit reserving pills, 100 low-grade spirit stones have been added to the backpack. Please extract them, host. Nice. Xin Yun couldn't help but praise herself in her heart. She quickened her pace, planning to go back and see the returned items. But she heard another sound of the system. Returned items, tenfold effect low-level spirit reserving pills, tenfold effect low-level chi recovery pills, and high-level spirit reserving pills contain demonic blood toxins. The system has automatically removed them. Xin Yun froze. Returned items contain poison. The system shouldn't make such mistakes. So, Xin Yun suddenly turned around, her gaze falling on the ground in front of the bamboo building. The returned items were based on the ones she had gifted. If the returned items contained poison, did that mean the items she had given were poisoned? Had the pills she gave been poison pills? Chapter 3, The Male Lead, Yu Qinan. In an instant, Xin Yun recalled the plot of the original story. The male lead, Yu Qinan, had fallen into a low point in his life. During a secret realm competition, he was set up by another sect, causing damage to his dantian and sealing off his future path. Despite the efforts of the senior members of the Xianling sect to heal him, they ultimately gave up on him, and the resources that had once been allocated to him were reclaimed. Yu Qinan tried to save himself, but he no longer had any resources at his disposal. On one of his trips out, after being mocked by the original host, he recalled the gifts he had once received. He used them. And that was when he was discovered to be tainted with demonic energy and suspected of associating with demonic cultivators. This nearly led to him being executed on the spot by the senior members of the Xianling sect. So, was this the true reason why, after making his comeback, Yu Qinan threw the original host into a demoness lair, watching her be tortured to death? Xin Yun broke out in cold sweat. If the system had not appeared, she would have chosen to stay away from the plot and live her own life. But as the story progressed, Yu Qinan would eventually fall to his lowest point again, remember the gifts, use them, and discover that they were poisoned. He would then make a comeback and kill her. Damn. Thank goodness the system appeared. Xin Yun breathed a sigh of relief and ran back to grab the poison pills she had left outside the door. Just as she was about to rise, she heard the door in front of her open from the inside. Xin Yun froze and looked up. A young man in his underclothes stood at the door, looking down at her with sharp eyes. His features were exquisitely sculpted, but there was a chill in his expression. Even with his hair disheveled and his appearance less than ideal, he exuded an aloof, cold aura. However, at that moment, his expression was clearly displeased. Xin Yun felt a bit guilty. She slowly stood up and forced a smile. Senior brother, what a coincidence. As soon as the words left her mouth, Xin Yun immediately wanted to slap herself. What a coincidence. How coincidental is it that I'm right at his doorstep? Yu Qinan didn't say a word, just stared at her coldly. After a few breaths, Xin Yun couldn't take the silence anymore. She turned her gaze away and slowly took a step back. Oh, senior brother, I think I got lost. I'll leave now. I remember I told you something, Yu Qinan suddenly spoke. Xin Yun had no choice but to stop and turn back to look at him. She saw him with a cold expression. No matter what you do, I will never like you. At that moment, Xin Yun didn't feel embarrassed anymore. She had already decided to be a devoted admirer. What was the point of maintaining face now? What was the value of this face? Could it compare to the rewards from the system? And what was wrong with the male lead's attitude? Anyone would be unhappy if someone they didn't like kept pestering them, especially showing up at their door in the middle of the night. If it were her in Yu Qinan's shoes, she might have already taken action. Thinking about it this way, the fact that Yu Qinan was still calm and speaking to her without losing his temper showed great restraint. Xin Yun adjusted her mindset and fully embraced the role of a devoted admirer. She bent down, picked up the spirit stones on the ground, and handed them to Yu Qinan. These are for you, senior brother. Yu Qinan furrowed his brows even more, his voice even colder. Don't you understand human speech? I don't need anything from you, and I'm not interested in you trying to please me. I will never like you. Xin Yun directly shoved the spirit stones into his hands. Yu Qinan refused to take them. So, the spirit stones fell to the ground with a crisp sound. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Xin Yun bent down, picked the spirit stones up again, and stood up to look at Yu Qinan. She smiled. Senior brother doesn't he need to like me? I like you, senior brother, and I want to give you a gift. This is my personal matter, you don't need to care about it. With that, she extended the spirit stones toward him again. Yu Qinan's anger flared up. You're affecting my life with your personal matter. Xin Yun paused for a moment. All right, I understand now. Yu Qinan sighed with relief. But Xin Yun continued. From now on, I'll try to avoid you, senior brother, and not disturb you. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Yu Qinan's right hand clenching into a fist, and she immediately sensed danger. She quickly changed the subject. By the way, senior brother, I came here for another reason. I've given you some pills before, and I don't think you've used them yet. Could you return them to me? After the system informed her that the pills were poisonous, Xin Yun had been thinking about one thing. Where did the poison come from? The pills she had were mostly distributed by the sect, and a small portion were bought with the help of Li Qing. Since the Xianling sect was a Daoist sect, it would be impossible for them to distribute poisonous pills to their disciples. Therefore, the problem must have occurred during the process between receiving the pills and when they came into her hands. Thinking back to the pills she had purchased, which were also toxic, the answer was clear. And if Li Qing was the culprit, then the pills she had given to the male lead in the past were most likely poisoned as well. If she didn't get them back, she would still be doomed. With her thoughts racing, Xin Yun looked at Yu Qinan seriously, as if completely unaware of how awkward it was to ask for the gifts she had given. Yu Qinan didn't expect her to make such a request. He gave her a deep, cold look, then turned and walked into their house. Wait here. Xin Yun calmly watched him. Before long, Yu Qinan came back out and handed her a ring. Xin Yun looked down and blinked. A storage ring. This wasn't something particularly valuable, but it was something the original host had never had. She was poor. All the things you've given me are inside, Yu Qinan said, his tone still icy. Take it, go back and focus on your cultivation. Don't waste your energy on things you shouldn't be focusing on. Did he think that she wanted to take the pills back to cultivate? Xin Yun understood his meaning but didn't explain. She took the storage ring, reached her spiritual sense into it, and so that many pills, spirit stones, clothing accessories, etc., were neatly categorized. She communicated with the system and took out a bottle of high-grade spiritual pills and placed it into the storage ring along with the 10 spirit stones she had on hand. Then, she pulled out all the pills she had previously given to him and held them in her arms. She handed the storage ring back to Yu Qinan and took a step back, distancing herself from him. It's getting late, senior brother. You should rest early. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll come back next time. With that, regardless of Yu Qinan's dark expression, Xin Yun turned and rushed into the bamboo forest, quickly disappearing. As she left, Yu Qinan's angry expression faded, replaced with a more complex look. He lowered his gaze to his fingertips. Where they had touched, there was still lingering warmth. Yu Qinan's gaze darkened, his fingers curled into a fist, gripping the storage ring in his palm before turning back to his house. A gust of wind appeared out of nowhere, and the door slammed shut. Xin Yun rushed out of the bamboo forest, and seeing that the male lead hadn't followed to beat her up, she slowed down. She got the pills back, her life was saved, and suddenly, the future didn't seem so bleak. With a relaxed and happy mood, Xin Yun continued on her way back to her residence, and quietly spoke. System, just now. Secondary gifting of items is invalid. The return items cannot be gifted. Gifts to other people are invalid. Please focus on completing the task, and don't waste your attention on irrelevant matters. Chapter 4 No. I haven't said anything yet. Although he had just stuffed the storage ring, the spirit stones and other items inside, and a bottle of high-level soul-nourishing pill returned by the system into the male protagonist's arms with the intention of breaking the system's rules, what did it mean to put his mind in the wrong place? Is it really okay for you to learn and apply the system like this? A thought flashed through his mind, and he saw with his spiritual sense the hundreds of spiritual stones in the storage ring. If he could return them. Xin Yun spoke somewhat unwillingly. Systems and rules are dead, people are alive, you are mine. Xin Yun suddenly stopped talking halfway through. Look around. I don't know when the bright moon was covered by dark clouds, the sky and the earth were dark, and the grass and trees on both sides were hazy and unclear, adding a sense of mystery and loneliness to this summer night. There was no wind around, but Xin Yun could feel a chill coming from behind, slowly climbing up her spine. Xin Yun turned back suddenly. No one, no sound. Pursing her lips tightly, Xin Yun turned back and quickened her pace, wanting to leave. But listen. Tat-tat. Tat-tat. There were footsteps that overlapped with hers, moving forward at the same frequency. Xin Yun's hair felt numb. At the same time, I was a little confused. This is the Xianling sect, one of the 10 great sects of the cultivation world mentioned in the original text, right? It is a gathering place for many cultivators, right? Then why are there unclean things? Is this reasonable? Taking a deep breath, Xin Yun pretended not to notice and continued walking forward. While secretly circulating his spiritual power to dispel the cold, he was also on guard against the situation behind him. 1 step, 10 steps, 100 steps. The chill on my back slowly rose to the back of my neck, and a gentle breeze of air sprinkled on my skin. Xin Yun seemed to hear a sigh. Call. Without hesitation, Xin Yun exerted force on her legs to create distance forward. At the same time, she condensed a fireball in her hand and smashed it backwards. The fireball is controlled by spiritual power, so even after it is launched, it can still sense the situation. Xin Yun clearly felt that this attack fell into the air and did not hit the enemy. She turned to look. A dark green transparent figure floated behind, with its head lowered, looking curiously at the fireball that passed through its body without causing any damage. Xin Yun. I was insulted. After one glance, Xin Yun turned and ran. But from the left side of the sky, there were sounds of swords and a shout. Who's there? At this time, the only people who dare to make noise openly are the Xianling sect's night patrol team. Xin Yun's eyes lit up, and without caring about what would happen if she was discovered, she turned around and ran towards the place where the sound came from. After about 2 breaths, a young man of about 18 or 19 came down towards this side on a flying sword. Xin Yun breathed a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, the next second, the young man's sword was placed on her neck. Outer sect disciple. Tell me. What is your purpose for sneaking into the sect master's peak in the middle of the night? Are this? Xin Yun was speechless for a moment. His eyes turned and looked back. The road was empty, and there was no dark green figure at all. It was as if everything that just happened was an illusion. But Xin Yun's rapid heartbeat told her that she was definitely not mistaken. What are you looking at? The young man asked. Xin Yun slowly turned around and thought about a reasonable excuse here. At this time, several more people rushed over. There were men and women, all around 17 or 18 years old, but they did not fly swords, but ran over on foot. When they saw Xin Yun, one of them said in surprise. Are you the outer disciple from the daytime? Is your name Xin Yun? Xin Yun was stunned. Know her, and know what happened during the day. Xin Yun changed her mind and denied it. I'm not Xin Yun. Having said that, his voice was very small and his tone was extremely weak. The young man who spoke earlier sneered, walked forward and said to the young man holding the sword. Brother Lin, today, junior sister Yun taught junior brother Yu a lesson to an outer disciple. It was her? I happened to be there at the time, so I know her. Forest? Xin Yun looked carefully at the young man in front of her. He had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes, and he looked imposing and majestic, like a sword drawn from its sheath, with its edge fully exposed, but under his right eye, there was a little red teardrop mole, which added a touch of softness to his sharp look. Xin Yun knew who he was. In the original text, the original owner later became an apprentice to Mu Rui, the signature figure of Xianling sect and the #1 swordsman in the cultivation world. This young man, named Lin Zizhua, is Mu Rui's first disciple and her senior brother. The most important point is that Lin Zizhua, for some unknown reason, later became the enemy of the male protagonist. Like her, he is a villain. Xin Yun suddenly felt that the young man in front of her became friendly. Although the boy's sword is still on her neck. After listening to the explanation, Lin Zizhua nodded, but did not take off the sword. A pair of eyes looked at Xin Yun calmly. What do you want to do when you come to Zhongzhou Peak? Xin Yun came back to her senses and avoided his sight. What not to do? It was the young man next to him who spoke. This location is very close to where junior brother Yu lives. Are you planning to sneak over to junior brother Yu's place? Xin Yun showed a look of surprise at first, then denied it in panic. No, I don't want to go to senior brother Yu's place. However, her guilty look was hard to believe. All the young men were silent, but there was more contempt and disgust in their eyes. Lin Zizhua slowly put away his sword. I will tell Yu Qinan about this. Xin Yun clenched the corner of her clothes with her fingers, looking a little embarrassed. But I don't care about it. Anyway, the male protagonist already knows it, so it doesn't matter whether he says it or not. Go back. Lin Zizhua continued. Don't go out at night. If you get caught again, it won't be this easy. Xin Yun was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I see. But his eyes were quietly looking behind him, towards the bamboo forest. Someone immediately sneered. "Oh, you're still not willing to give up. You plan to wait until we leave and then go find junior brother Yu? What? Didn't junior sister Yun's whip teach you a lesson?" Xin Yun withdrew her gaze. He pursed his lips tightly and muttered softly. "I don't." Lin Zizhui glanced at her and said to the others, "You guys continue patrolling, I'll take her back." After he finished speaking, regardless of their reactions, he swung out his sword, made it bigger, and stopped it next to Xin Yun. Lin Zizhui stepped forward first. "Come up." Xin Yun shook her head. "Thank you, brother, but it's not necessary. I can go back by myself." "Come up." Lin Zizhui repeated it with a stronger tone. Xin Yun hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward without hesitation. "Sorry for the trouble, senior brother." As their words fell, the guilty look from before disappeared completely. Lin Zizhui paused and looked back at her. Xin Yun looked innocent. "What are you looking at? I didn't ask for anything. You offered it to me." In the end, Lin Zizhui said nothing and controlled the flying sword under his feet to soar into the sky. Chapter 5, 10 times the effect of soul-enriching pill. The flying sword climbed upwards and stopped when it was 20 feet above the ground. Lin Zizhui turned around. "Where does Junia's sister live?" "Between the sect master peak and the weapon refining peak, outer sect area 7, number 1100. Xin Yun answered, and then continued. "Brother, send me to that area, and I will go back by myself." Lin Zizhui responded, adjusted the direction of flight, and headed east. Only at this point did Xin Yun have the mind to pay attention to her surroundings. There was a whistling sound of wind in my ears, clouds and mist lingering around me, and the hazy night scene passed by quickly as far as my sight could reach. It was quite spectacular. Xin Yun suddenly felt her legs go weak. Take a deep breath, focus your eyes in front of you, on Lin Zizhui's straight back, and try to forget where you are. Lin Zizhui seemed to sense something, but he remained silent, pretending not to know. In this way, about half a minute passed. The flying sword broke into a complex of buildings located in a basin and landed accurately in front of a small courtyard. Arrive. Xin Yun looked around. I found myself at the gate of my own courtyard. So he dragged his weak legs off the flying sword, turned around, and saluted Lin Zizhui. "Thank you, brother." "Nothing." Lin Zizhui shook his head. Then he controlled the flying sword into the air and flew back the way he came, and soon disappeared. Xin Yun looked at the sky, thoughtfully. Although this senior brother looks cold, he has a good personality. How come he became a villain? She turned around and walked slowly into the yard. But he felt as if there was a gaze staring at him from the right front. Xin Yun turned around to look. There was no one in the building shrouded in darkness. However, the courtyard on the right is Li Qing's residence. Her gaze stayed on the wall for a second or two, then Xin Yun withdrew her attention and pushed open her own gate. Only after she entered the house, closed the door, and activated the formation of the courtyard did Xin Yun relax. He threw the poison pill he had been holding in his arms on the table and sat down on the chair next to it. During the day, when she mentioned that she wanted to give up pursuing the male lead, Li Qing reacted strongly. She felt something was wrong at the time, but she didn't think too much about it. Until later it was discovered that the pill was poisonous. The original owner thought Li Qing was good because Li Qing supported her in pursuing the male protagonist from the beginning to the end. Every time she was frustrated by the male protagonist, he would comfort her and tell her that she could do it. But think about it carefully, if it was really for the original owner's good, why would he let her throw herself into the fire and chase after someone she couldn't catch? Li Qing just needed a way to deliver the poison pill to the male protagonist. Xin Yun couldn't help but sigh. Then another question came to mind. Why did Li Qing want to harm the hero? Was she grudged? Or was she being instigated by someone behind the scenes? Xin Yun is more inclined to the second guess. The devil blood poison is related to the devil, so how could an ordinary righteous disciple easily obtain it? But in this case, the crisis is only on the male protagonist's side. As a tool in the middle, she only needs to worry about Li Qing's reaction after the falling out, and get out of the quagmire targeting the male protagonist in a reasonable way to save her life. But Xin Yun had no idea what the reasonable approach would be, so she could only suppress it for the time being. He stood up, walked to the bed, climbed on, and sat cross-legged. No matter what the possibility is, no matter what the approach is, strength is necessary. Only by becoming stronger can we deal with everything more calmly. The original owner had been in Xianling sect for nearly a year, and his cultivation level had reached the 3rd level of qi refining. He couldn't compare with the genius of the male protagonist, but in the outer sect, he was already in the 1st echelon. And this was even though she had never used any cultivation resources. Xin Yun seemed to be thinking about something. Communicate with the system space, take out a bottle of low-level soul nourishing pill that has been returned with 10 times the effect, open the lid and look inside. 5 transparent pills as white jade lay quietly inside, looking very extraordinary. Yunling pill is a kind of pill that assists in spiritual practice. It can help the user attract free spiritual energy between heaven and earth, thereby increasing the speed of practice. Depending on the individual's absorption rate of the medicine, the speed of absorbing spirits can be increased by 10% to 50%. The so-called high-level spirit nourishing pills multiplied this speed by 2, and can increase the speed of absorbing spirits by up to twice. Of course, due to the limitation of the quality of the elixir, low-level soul nourishing pills are only useful in the qi refining stage, and high-level ones can only be used in the foundation establishment stage. Above that, they are basically useless. He poured a pill out of the small bottle and put it into his mouth out of curiosity about the tenfold effect. Then he raised his 5 hearts upward and assumed a standard cultivation posture. He then found the original owner's cultivation method from his memory, the unified method of the Xianling sect, Xianling Ju. After taking the pill, a warm current surged up from his body, and the spiritual energy around him became active and rushed towards Xin Yun. Xin Yun did not dare to delay and hurriedly began to practice her skills, taking the incoming spiritual power into her body. At the same time, she guided the incoming spiritual power, familiarized herself with her new home, and refined it into her own. After 1 Juqian and 2 Juqian, Xin Yun gradually felt something was wrong. There was too much spiritual power in her body and she couldn't refine it. Feeling waves of swelling and pain in her meridians, Xin Yun had to leave a hole in her meridians to allow the spiritual energy that had entered her body but had not been refined in time to leave her body. The pain in the meridians was gone, and Xin Yun continued to guide and refine them. But gradually, I discovered something was wrong. She thought that the soul-enhancing pill with 10 times the effect would have a terrifying effect, but she didn't expect that the improvement would be 5 times the original owner's practice, an integer 5 times. Based on this speculation, when this body uses ordinary low-level soul-nourishing pills, the improvement it can get is an integer of 50%. This doesn't make sense. The Yunling pill's enhancement effect reaches 50%, but it only exists in theory because no one can fully absorb the efficacy of a pill. But now, she did it. Is this body really just an ordinary body with 3 spiritual roots? Xin Yun didn't know the answer. But for her, it's a good thing. As long as resources are provided, her strength will increase rapidly and she will become stronger. But be careful not to let others discover the clues. Having reached a conclusion, Xin Yun dispelled all distracting thoughts and devoted herself fully to practice. Time flies, the night gradually fades away, and the first rays of morning sunlight shine into the room. Xin Yun on the bed slowly opened her eyes and exhaled. Feeling that his body had broken through to the 4th level of qi training, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. If you break through 1 level in 1 night, then tomorrow you will break through the 5th level, the day after tomorrow the 6th level, and the day after tomorrow the 7th level. Wouldn't that mean you can reach heaven directly? Although I know in my heart that this breakthrough was due to the original owner's hard work at the 3rd level of qi training for 4 months, it's just a dream, so it's not bad. Xin Yun narrowed her eyes slightly, imagined the future, and couldn't help but laugh twice. But I felt a hint of green in the peripheral light. Xin Yun was stunned, slowly turned her head and looked to her left. Then he saw a beautiful girl with dark green and transparent hair leaning against him. He closed his eyes tightly and slept soundly. But she has no weight. She is the unclean thing I met on the road last night. Chapter 6. There should be a tale here. Xin Yun was numb. In order to avoid this thing last night, she even exposed herself and almost became a purposeful person who sneaked into the sect master's peak. How come this hasn't been shaken off yet? Her body was frozen, not daring to move, while her mind was racing. There is no description of this dark green woman in the original plot. Then, it is possible that the original text is from the male protagonist's first perspective and does not explain the villain's side. It could also be that the original owner was beaten and injured yesterday, and did not go to the male protagonist's residence at night, so nothing happened, but when she went there, she coincidentally ran into evil? The answer is still unknown, but it is obvious that fear and anxiety will not solve the problem. Taking a deep breath, Xin Yun forced herself to calm down. Stretch out your crossed legs to make it easier to escape. Then he moved suddenly, supporting himself on the bed with one hand, and jumped directly to the ground. Not caring about being barefoot, he quickly ran towards the door and away from the bed. Look back. The dark green woman lost her strength and fell onto the bed with a pop. I opened my eyes and looked around blankly. His eyes swept around the room and finally fell on Xin Yun. Then he showed joy on his face, floated up from the bed and came over. Xin Yun's eyelids twitched. Is this really haunting her? He casually rolled up a fireball and threw it at the opponent without caring whether it was useful or not. At the same time, he retreated to the door, intending to leave the house. But the dark green woman's eyes lit up, and she rushed towards the fireball, opened her mouth, and swallowed the fireball into her stomach with a "Wow." Xin Yun. How insulting. Xin Yun was filled with grief and anger, but her hands moved quickly. She opened the door and stepped out of the threshold. Look at the dark green woman again. After swallowing the fireball, it did not continue to flow towards Xin Yun, but stood there, looking at her expectantly. Expect? Xin Yun chewed over the two words and temporarily stopped running out. He rolled out a new fireball and threw it to the right side of the room. The dark green woman hurriedly floated over and let out a breath. Xin Yun rubbed it again and threw it to the left. The dark green woman did the same thing. Xin Yun threw it several times in different directions and received a response every time. Looking at the happy expression of the dark green woman, Xin Yun silently shifted her gaze and looked behind the woman. Empty. But I always feel that there should be a tail here. A second later, Xin Yun withdrew her gaze and made up her mind. The dark green woman had no intention of harming her, otherwise she would not have woken up this morning. When I was practicing last night, my mind was all inside my body, and I was completely defenseless against the outside world. If they wanted to take action, they would have done it long ago. As for why this thing was haunting her, Xin Yun also had an idea. Retracting her foot that had stepped out of the threshold, Xin Yun gathered a ball of spiritual power in her palm and stepped forward. Sure enough, the dark green woman looked at her palm with desire on her face, and there seemed to be some suspicious liquid flowing from the corner of her mouth. Xin Yun's lips curled up. He spoke while extending the spiritual power in his palm forward. Hello, would you like to get to know me? The dark green woman followed Xin Yun's palm, floated over, opened her mouth and swallowed the spiritual power. Then he looked up at her, expectantly and eagerly, but did not reply. If your IQ is not high, you probably won't be able to understand what others say. Xin Yun made a judgment. He gathered a new spiritual energy and fed it to her, then began to think. During last night's practice, my refining speed was not fast enough and I wasted a lot of spiritual energy. The dark green woman leaned on me, most likely to absorb this spiritual energy. With the system in place, there will definitely be a lot of similar waste in my future practice. Then he fed the things he couldn't use to the dark green woman, built a closer relationship with her, and then found a way to communicate and make the dark green woman listen to him. Wouldn't this be a help in the future? However, there still needs to be a restraint to ensure that after this dark green woman is fed, she will not turn against her and attack her. As I was thinking about it, I suddenly felt my finger being bitten. Xin Yun raised her eyes to look. The dark green woman bit her fingertips lightly and looked at her eagerly, with 3 big words written all over her face. Please feed me. Xin Yun smiled and sent the spiritual power through her fingers. The dark green woman was immediately immersed in it, her expression full of joy. Xin Yun quietly raised her other hand and, according to the original owner's memory, used her spiritual power to outline the mark of the contracted spirit beast. He moved closer to the dark green woman's brow and pressed his finger there. The next second, the mark disappeared with a pop and dissipated on its own. The dark green woman looked up blankly and looked at Xin Yun in confusion. Xin Yun's eyes twitched, and she increased the flow of spiritual power through her fingertips. The dark green woman then ignored her and absorbed the spiritual power with peace of mind. Xin Yun suddenly felt guilty for kidnapping a good girl. Then he shook his head. This is a ghost, not a good family. The spirit beast contract is aimed at spirit beasts, so it is expected that it will fail against ghosts. After thinking for a while, Xin Yun condensed a tiny wooden thorn, carefully pierced her fingertips, squeezed out a drop of blood, and pressed it on the dark green woman's brow. Stop and wait. Then the drop of blood gradually seeped into the dark green woman's brow, and soon her forehead became smooth again. Then, Xin Yun sensed a vague connection. The dark green woman raised her eyes and looked at her, with a hint of intimacy in her eyes. At the same time, a sense of confusion came over me. I'm hungry, I want to eat. Xin Yun. After a moment of silence, she simply pulled her fingers back. No more, let's practice at night. The previous ordeal had already used up most of the little spiritual power she had left in her body. Although the body has been absorbing external spiritual energy as a supplement, the speed is very slow and cannot keep up with the consumption. So I can't feed it. What if it gets sucked dry? And at the moment Xin Yun pulled her hand away, the joy on the dark green woman's face turned into pity. Waves of grievances came through the connection. Xin Yun chose to ignore it. He walked past her and went back to the bed, putting on his shoes first before waving to the dark green woman. Come on, let's talk. While speaking, he sat on the edge of the bed and crossed one leg. The dark green woman floated over and looked at her eagerly. Xin Yun crossed her arms and looked at her carefully. It's really beautiful. Even though his expression was not good at this moment, there was still a sense of nobleness and arrogance. So Xin Yun asked, "What's your name? Where are you from? Why are you following me?" While speaking, the connection between the two allowed the dark green woman to understand her meaning directly on a spiritual level. The dark green woman tilted her head, her expression blank for a moment. Then he moved closer, took Xin Yun's hand, lifted it up, and placed it to his mouth. He opened his mouth and gently bit her finger. Food. Although the consciousness transmitted through the connection was not clear, Xin Yun still grasped the other key points besides asking for food. No name, no idea where it came from. I liked it very much, so I came here. So what the hell does this take her for? Xin Yun was filled with grief and indignation. Chapter 7, Alu. Xin Yun pulled her fingers back in grief and anger. Since you don't have a name, I'll call you Alu from now on. The dark green woman tilted her head and understood a little. Open your mouth. R. It seemed as if he wanted to imitate Xin Yun's pronunciation, but he didn't quite understand it, so he made an R sound for a while and then stopped. In response, Xin Yun was not in a hurry. She demonstrated again and tried to guide her in pronunciation. Come on, read along with me, Arlu, Liulu. R. After a while, Alu was finally able to clearly say her own name. Aliu, Aliu. She kept mumbling to herself, floating around the room, looking very unhappy. Xin Yun watched with a smile. I also got to know the situation of this ghost. It's not that Alu has a low IQ, but she lacks knowledge about the world, just like a newborn baby. Therefore, if Xin Yun wants to communicate with Alu more easily in the future and drive her to become an assistant, the first thing she needs to do is to teach her to understand the world. This is by no means an easy task, and Xin Yun has no experience in being a parent. Therefore, Xin Yun decided to put the matter aside for the time being and look for other solutions later. He stood up from the bed, found his clothes and put them on, then performed a cleaning spell to solve the problem of washing. By the way, I took a look at the whip wounds on his body. It has almost healed, with only some red marks left, which will probably disappear soon. When practicing, spiritual energy will flow through the meridians, and some of it will seep into the flesh and blood, improving physical fitness. When there is excess spiritual power, even if she does not deliberately guide it, some of it will consciously flow to the wound and promote self-healing. It's a good thing, as it saves me from going for treatment again. After finishing the tidying up, Xin Yun walked over and stopped Arlu from flying around. I have to go out to the spiritual weapon peak. I can't take care of you for the time being. You stay at home alone and wait for me to come back, okay? Alu was stunned for a while, then shook her head. He looked at her expectantly, and through the contact, conveyed his intention to follow. No. Xin Yun decisively refused. What if she followed him out and was discovered? How would she explain that she had a little ghost? Arlu was frightened by her voice and floated away a little. Then, as if through their connection, he understood Xin Yun's determination, ran to the corner, hugged himself and curled up into a ball. No food, can't be together, so bad, sob. Xin Yun. Are all of you ghosts like this? But in this matter, she really couldn't go along with Alu. He simply ignored his pitiful gaze and walked out of the door. Alu hurriedly floated over, trying to catch up. But Xin Yun turned around and looked at her seriously. Arlu hurriedly hugged her poor self. Ying. Xin Yun was helpless and reached out to touch her head. Be obedient and look after the house. I'll be back when I'm done. Arlu pouted, looking very unhappy. But in the end, he chose to float back and sat on the bed where Xin Yun had sat before. It means she will be obedient. Xin Yun was relieved. He closed the door and strode out of the yard. The original owner had reserved a job for her to process spiritual materials at Lingqi Peak. According to the Xianling sect's rules, no matter if they are inner or outer disciples, they do not have to take any responsibility in their first year in the sect. The sect will distribute cultivation resources, and set up cultivation common sense, cultivation techniques, and some low-level magic courses for disciples to learn and practice. For example, the original owner, in addition to taking general knowledge and skills classes, also learned low-level skills such as cleaning skills, light body skills, and lore skills, as well as the 3 methods of controlling water, wood, and fire according to his own spiritual roots. So far, although I can't say that I am proficient in using it, at least I can use it when I want to. The original owner did not know the specific situation of the other disciples, but according to Xin Yun, they should be similar to hers. Then, 1 year later, these disciples who have mastered certain abilities will need to complete quantitative tasks according to the sect's requirements. Tasks include farming and breeding, refining medicine and weapons, hunting ferocious beasts, etc. The original owner has 1 month left to complete a year since he entered the sect. According to the rules, he does not need to complete any tasks, but she wanted to make money to buy things for the male protagonist, so she took the initiative to go to the weapon refining peak and found a job processing spiritual materials. The purpose is not simple, but part of it is to make plans for the future path of refining equipment. After thinking about it, Xin Yun decided to continue along this path. Having skills is never a burden, let alone external equipment like spiritual weapons that can enhance combat power. So, Xin Yun first went to the cafeteria on the edge of the residential area, had a simple breakfast, and then rushed all the way to the Lingcai Hall on the hillside of Lingqi Peak. As soon as you enter the lobby, many eyes are focused on you. Here it comes. She's pretty, no wonder she dares to sneak into someone else's house in the middle of the night to offer herself to them. Bar, how shameless. Wow, I don't believe it. She really went in. Really with senior brother Yu. Well, the rumors are true. Xin Yun was full of questions when she heard this. No, isn't this rumor a bit exaggerated? Is it exaggerated to such an extent? Although he had anticipated that the news of his discovery by the patrol team would spread, didn't those people think that he had not yet entered the bamboo forest? How did it develop into entering the room and what happened? While Xin Yun lamented that people's words were scary, she maintained a calm demeanor, looked straight ahead, and walked through the lobby at a steady speed. Just pretend you didn't hear anything. Go out from the back door of the lobby and turn left to a spacious 2-story attic. This is a place dedicated to processing spiritual materials. Walking quickly into the attic, you can see a wide hall and neatly arranged small rooms on both sides. There are a lot fewer disciples than outside. Although there were people who looked at her strangely, they were very few and could be completely ignored. Xin Yun walked to the only counter in the hall and spoke to the 2 girls who were sitting inside and sorting out jade talismans. Senior sister, I'm here to take on the mission. Hearing this, the girl on the left looked up at her, her eyes full of disgust. Xin Yun smiled back. Not to mention disgust, when they came in just now, several people were eager to come up and fight with her. In comparison, just a bad look is nothing. Besides, she knew this girl. Her name is Hu Kuei. She has been here since the first day she arrived and is responsible for sorting and distributing tasks. If there is anything that is deeply memorable, it is Hu Kuei's third uncle, who is the elder in charge of handling the spiritual materials here. Hu Kuei seemed to feel something was wrong when seeing Xin Yun's smiling face. She suppressed the emotion in her eyes, lowered her head and picked up a jade talisman from the table. Give me the ID card. Xin Yun took out a black wooden sign from her body and handed it over. Hu Kuei connected it with the jade talisman in his hand, sent spiritual power into one of the breaths, and then handed the number plate back. Room 107, the mission requires you to read it yourself. Okay, thank you, senior sister. Xin Yun remained polite, took the number tag and walked towards the row of rooms on the left side of the hall. After she walked away, the girl on the right came up to Hu Kuei and spoke in a low voice. Isn't it about the salamander skin in room 107? Is there a problem? Hu Kuei snorted coldly and lowered his head to continue his work. I don't know what the problem is. Chapter 8. Yes, it's poisonous. On this side, Xin Yun walked to room 107 and pressed the wooden sign in her hand into the groove on the door. Then there was a slight click sound, and the door opened automatically. A wooden workbench was placed in the middle of the room, and next to it were chairs for resting and a cushion for practicing. Then, there were the red lizard skins piled on the ground. Xin Yun walked in, closed the door, and walked closer to take a closer look. There was still some unprocessed flesh and blood left on the lizard's skin, and a lot of blood had gathered on the ground. Xin Yun couldn't help but frown. Searching the original owner's memory. When dealing with spiritual materials, you can see all kinds of diverse things. The original owner had forged iron, melted gold and silver, refined blood, dissected ferocious beasts, and even once, was disfigured by a piece of wood that suddenly came to life. The more Xin Yun looked, the more shocked she became. In the end, she could only sigh. The original owner was really brave. And every time I wanted to retreat, I would think of the male protagonist and force myself to persevere. Xin Yun doesn't quite understand people who are willing to do anything for love, but she admires them. Collecting her thoughts, Xin Yun picked up a piece of lizard skin and placed it on the workbench. By the way, I looked at the task requirements through the wooden sign. Clean the fire lizard skin, refine it to a degree that is easy to preserve and use, and cut it into regular shapes. The task has been accepted, and it would be bad not to do it. Although Xin Yun felt a little disgusted by the skin mixed with flesh and blood, she was able to overcome it. He put away the wooden sign and looked at the fiery red lizard skin in front of him, and some information appeared in his mind. Salamander skin comes from the first level ferocious beast, the fiery salamander. It can be used to make leather armor, but more often, it is made into inner armor based on its breathability and warmth-retaining properties. The original owner had come into contact with and dealt with it before. Of course, the first step is to make it into leather suitable for storage and refining. As for the subsequent steps of making the armor, it requires the work of a specialized weapon refiner to maximize its performance. With a plan in mind, Xin Yun sat on a chair beside her, condensed flames on her hands, and slowly wrapped the entire lizard skin. The flame flickered, directly burning the remaining flesh and blood into ashes, and the excess water in the lizard's skin also began to slowly drain away. This lasted for about half a quarter of an hour, and the requirements were basically met. Xin Yun retracted the flame and performed a cleaning spell, intending to remove the dust stains before continuing to cut. However, he felt that the circulation of spiritual power was obscure, and the cleaning technique that he could perform with just a thought took a breath to perform on the fire lizard's skin. What's going on? Xin Yun frowned. Put down the fire lizard skin in your hand, close your eyes, and focus inward. He saw that the colorless spiritual power in his dantian was stained with black at some point. My dantian felt stuffy and my head was a little dizzy for some reason. Is this poison? How could the skin of the fire lizard be poisonous? Did the people who sorted the spiritual materials not notice this problem? Or? Hu Kuei's face flashed through Xin Yun's mind. She frowned and felt something was wrong. But I didn't dare to think about it at this time. Lift your legs, sit in a meditation position on a chair, and focus your mind on your dantian. He mobilized his spiritual power and used a small portion of it to wrap the black poison and separate it from the rest of the spiritual power. Then he controlled the spiritual power wrapped in the poison and carefully moved it out of the body. Because the body has been poisoned, the detoxification process is not fast. As Xin Yun was moving the wheel, she suddenly felt something was wrong. The black poison was wrapped in colorless spiritual power. It was not agitated and was slowly assimilating the spiritual power. The spiritual power, on the other hand, seemed unable to tolerate this provocation and instead swallowed the poison. The speed of the former cannot match that of the latter. Therefore, as time goes by, the poison has become much weaker. Xin Yun was stunned and changed the order. So, the spiritual power that had been provoked for a long time and was wary of the poison because of her thoughts, rushed forward like crazy and quickly consumed the poison. Xin Yun immediately felt that she was no longer dizzy, her body was no longer uncomfortable, and even her cultivation seemed to have improved a little. Xin Yun was stunned. Do I still have this ability? She was not naive enough to think that the means used by the person who harmed her were so simple. Therefore, the problem is not the poison, but her. With a lot of questions in mind, Xin Yun picked up another fire lizard skin, urged the flame to repeat the process, and at the same time paid attention to observing her body. There was nothing unusual during the entire process until the end, when she retracted the flame and drew the spiritual power that was driving it back into her dantian. Then a trace of black poison entered her body. The feeling of dizziness came again, but Xin Yun completely ignored it, closed her eyes and stared inside her body, while commanding the spiritual power in her body not to resist. This time, it was a one-way assimilation of the black toxin. Xin Yun observed for a few moments. On the premise that the body's spiritual power does not devour the toxins are wrapped and sent out of the body. The poison quickly dissipated as soon as it came into contact with the air. The spiritual power that completed the mission returned to the body, but it brought back a very faint black poison. Assimilation, contamination, and inability to expel. Xin Yun was shocked. This poison is too sinister, isn't it? But Xin Yun mobilized her spiritual power to devour the poison, and felt that her cultivation had indeed improved a little, and she began to get excited. What is poison to others is sweetness to me. Thank you, my friend, for the treasure you sent me. She no longer sat on the chair, but took the cushion and ran to the pile of salamander skins, sitting cross-legged. It urges the flame to burn from one corner and actively draws poison into the body. While devouring to increase his cultivation, he was thinking about what to do next. What this friend did was good, but her heart was not kind. Most of the disciples who are able to enter the attic in the back hall of the Lingsai Hall come with missions. Everyone is busy and has no time to spare, so they don't pay extra attention to others. Even when they walk, they are in a hurry. In this case, a studio door was opened and someone walked out without attracting any attention at all. Until the man who came out staggered, and after a few steps, he fell straight to the ground with a dull sound. Finally, it attracted attention. A nearby female disciple was stunned for a moment, then rushed forward in one leap. He bent down and helped the person who had fallen down to his feet. How are you? Are you feeling unwell? Are you okay? Xin Yun raised her eyelids and glanced at the female disciple, and said in a weak voice, Yes, it's poisonous. The female disciple frowned, hugged Xin Yun in her arms, and put one hand on her wrist. Before the spiritual power can penetrate. Then another disciple who entered Xin Yun's workshop shouted, Don't use your spiritual power. There are fire lizard skins in this room. She might have been poisoned by the fire lizard. The female disciple's face changed drastically and she withdrew her hand in panic. Most of the others also showed expressions of horror. Xin Yun's face showed pain and her heart was confused. What is a poisonous fire lizard? Isn't it a fiery fire lizard? The original owner didn't have this knowledge in his memory? While I was still confused, the disciples around me had already started moving. I'll go get the elders. You, the one who is poisoned, don't use your spiritual power, never. Tell the elders that it is fire poison, and ask them to bring the water spirit jade over. Chapter 9 I Will Die. Perhaps noticing Xin Yun's confusion, the female disciple who was supporting her explained. The poison salamander is a variant of the fiery salamander. It looks the same as the fiery salamander, but it has an additional unique fire poison. A toxin that will still exist even if the poisonous salamander dies and will pollute the spiritual power of anyone who comes into contact with it. It is extremely harmful. This kind of poison can only be removed by the pure water element in the water jade. I see. Xin Yun nodded suddenly. But I heard the familiar voice of Hu Kuei coming from the front. What are you all doing here? Xin Yun looked with empty eyes. Hu Kuei walked into the crowd. After seeing her poor condition, a hint of success flashed in his eyes and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. Although it was quickly suppressed, Xin Yun still had doubts and observed carefully, so she did not miss it. Hu Kuei looked at the person next to him with a serious expression and asked as if he didn't know. What's going on? Someone immediately spoke up to explain everything. Hu Kuei nodded. I see. Then he stepped closer and smiled at Xin Yun. Don't worry, junior sister Xin, this poison is not fatal. At most it will affect your cultivation. When the elders come over, they will use the water spirit jade to remove the poison from you, and everything will be fine. Xin Yun simply shifted her gaze and ignored her. He reached out and grabbed the collar of the female disciple next to him, with a painful expression. Sister, I don't feel well. The female disciple was shocked. He quickly adjusted his posture, sat on the ground, dragged Xin Yun into his arms, and let her lie down. Have you used your spiritual power? For this kind of fire poison, the more active the spiritual power is, the faster it will be contaminated. Relax your body, don't pay attention to the situation in your dantian, don't look at it, don't give orders, let the spiritual power calm down. Xin Yun sobbed. Tried to squeeze out tears, but no tears came out. So I cried twice. Senior sister, I feel like I'm dying. The female disciple raised her head and looked in one direction. Since the person who went to look for the elder didn't come back, I had no choice but to continue comforting him. You won't die. The fire poison is not life-threatening. Didn't senior sister who also say that? It will at most affect your cultivation. Xin Yun finally squeezed out tears. But I am a cultivator. If I lose my cultivation, it's no different from being dead, woo-woo. The female disciple was immediately embarrassed. It took a while to find the sound. This shouldn't be all lost. Xin Yun cried even louder. I won't lose everything, but I will lose most of it. I might as well die. Woo-hoo. Female disciple. The atmosphere suddenly became tense and the scene was completely silent, with only Xin Yun's crying voice ringing out. Do this for about a few breaths. Xin Yun's sobbing stopped temporarily, and she struggled as if to sit up. Unexpectedly, the next moment, the world was spinning and he fell down limply. She sniffed and her eyes became blurred. I can't just die like this without knowing why. The female disciple's face twitched and she spoke softly. You won't die. Xin Yun turned a deaf ear. As I recall, all the spiritual materials here need to go through a safety inspection before we can arrange for our disciples to handle them. I just don't know which senior brother or sister is responsible for the safety inspection of my workshop. Didn't you find any problem? This also reminded everyone present. They looked around and at each other, and finally, some people focused their attention on a young man. The young man saw that the matter involved himself. As a last resort, he stepped out. My name is Xin Yun. Today's spiritual material safety inspection is in the charge of me and several other brothers. However, he seemed to want to say something, but then seemed to remember something and paused. He glanced at Hu Kuei, and after looking into her eyes, he slowly spoke. We didn't find any problems with the spiritual materials in room 107 at the time. After all, there is almost no difference between the poisonous fire lizard and the fire lizard in appearance. 1 or 2 poisonous fire lizard skins mixed in with the fire lizard skins are too difficult to find. But this matter was indeed caused by our negligence, which led to junior sister's accidental poisoning. I am very sorry. Xin Yun looked at him with a gloomy tone. But, the 107 salamander skins in the room are all poisonous. Xin Yuan was stunned. Then I heard Xin Yun crying. I have been in the spiritual materials hall for a while now, and no accidents have happened to me, so I trust the examination results of my senior brothers and sisters. After entering the room, they piled the fire lizard skins together and chose to refine them together with fire. The result was, the poison in the 107 skins has entered my body. As soon as these words fell, everyone present couldn't help but gasp. If they had thought before that this matter was not a big deal and could be resolved by calling the elders, but now no one knew what kind of damage would be done to the dantian after the fire poison completely contaminated the spiritual power in the body, and whether it would endanger life. And the most important point. Like Xin Yun, they believed in the inspection results of others and handled the spiritual materials directly. Xin Yun will get into trouble because of this, will they be the next? Even if the probability is very small, what if? Xin Yuan broke out in a cold sweat. They discovered the problem at the time, but because they were unable to separate the two types of leather and were afraid of making a mistake, they just made a note and put it aside for the time being. Waiting for someone with strong ability and confidence in sorting to come and handle these fire lizard skins. Therefore, no one has observed in detail how many skins a poisonous fire lizard has. But now, Xin Yuan spoke with gritted teeth. Sorry, maybe we didn't observe carefully enough at that time. Sorry? What's the use of being sorry? Xin Yun cried. Because of your carelessness, I'm almost dead. What's the use of apologizing? Woohoo! The female disciple who was holding her tightened her arms. Look at it in a positive way, you may not die. Xin Yun wiped her tearful eyes with her hands. Upon hearing this, her tone changed and she spoke firmly. No, I'll die. Female disciple. After answering, Xin Yun continued to cry to Xin Yuan. It is your duty to check the safety of spiritual materials. How can you not be serious? Woo woo, I don't want to die. I'm unwilling to die because of your carelessness. I feel so wronged, woo woo. Amid the crying, whispering sounds slowly began to rise around her. She reminded me that next time before handling spiritual materials, I must make sure they are safe. I wonder who else will be inspecting today besides Xin Yuan. I must avoid them next time, or else I'll be the next one. What should I do? That's right, stay away from these people. These countless voices poured into Xin Yuan's ears, and he panicked. In particular, there was obvious distrust in all the looks. Xin Yuan clenched his fists. I gritted my teeth and made a decision. No, that's not the case. We have discovered the problem. We found that the fire lizard skins were mixed with poisonous fire lizard skins. This is recorded in the inspection records. If you don't believe me, you can go and see. Chapter 10 Tell Brother Yu. At this moment, Xin Yuan figured it out. He has been put on the fire and has to make a choice. If he continues to lie and help Hu Kuei conceal the truth, he may gain some benefits and the favor of Elder Hu behind him. But what he lost was everyone's trust. From then on, he was labeled as careless and irresponsible. They would doubt him, think he was incompetent, and avoid having anything to do with him. When he is away from the sect on a mission, facing an enemy, or fighting, no one will trust him with their backs. Once the seeds of doubt are planted, they are difficult to dispel. Xin Yuan didn't think that he could live well in a future where he was excluded, so he had to change this impression. I lied. He said so. The problem with room 107 has already been recorded, but someone still assigned this junior sister to do the task. The noise around him gradually died down as he spoke. Xin Yun tilted her head and stopped her fake crying tone. Why lie? Xin Yuan paused, not daring to look at Hu Kuei, who was standing next to him with a sharp gaze. Then Xin Yun continued. Because I'm alone, and behind this senior sister Hu, there is someone you can't afford to offend. She said it directly and clearly, causing an uproar at the scene. And Hu Kuei's voice was even colder. Xin Yun, slandering your fellow disciples is a serious crime. Is slander a serious crime? Xin Yun chuckled. What kind of crime is it to murder a fellow disciple? Is it a very serious crime? Hu Kuei looked gloomy. Xin Yun? Don't be so loud, your father can hear you. Xin Yun spoke calmly. He supported himself with one hand and sat up from the female disciple's arms. After thinking for a while, he felt that it was intimidating to look up at the enemy. He stood up directly. The female disciple looked at her empty arms and fell into deep thought. Why? Senior sister who thinks I'm wrong. Xin Yun looked at Hu Kuei. The procedure for processing spiritual materials here is just a few steps. There is no problem with the person in charge of security. I, the person involved, cannot harm myself. So who else could it be except you, the person in charge of issuing the mission? You knew there was something wrong with the spiritual material, but you still let me, who was unaware of the situation, handle it. Isn't this murder? As she spoke, Xin Yun looked at Xin Yuan beside her. Senior brother Qin also said that security checks will be recorded. Sister, if what I said is wrong, why don't you take out the records so that we can see for ourselves? Hu Kuei looked grim and gritted her teeth. Why are you okay? Xin Yun's expression froze. Oh, I am still poisoned. She turned around and reached out to help the female disciple who was sitting on the ground. Thank you for your help, senior sister. The female disciple stood up with a strange look on her face as she pushed forward. Unexpectedly, the next second, Xin Yun came closer again. Help me again, please. Female disciple. Xin Yun stood up next to the female disciple and looked at Hu Kuei again. Obviously, something's wrong with me. I'm dying. You fart. The female disciple rolled her eyes and everyone around her was speechless. Hu Kuei's face darkened, and he finally couldn't help but curse. Shameless. Xin Yun looked calm. Senior sister Hu, would you dare to take out the inspection records and let everyone present take a look? Hu Kuei was speechless immediately. With a gloomy face, he stared at Xin Yun with hatred. Her reaction was equivalent to agreeing with Xin Yun's words. If she doesn't dare to take it out, then it means that what Xin Yun said is true. Did Xin Yun's sister who really give her the problematic task? I never thought that the truth would be like this. She plotted to murder a fellow disciple. Isn't she afraid of being punished by the sect? Hu Kuei heard all the discussions and was so angry that her chest heaved violently. Looking at Xin Yun again, although she was leaning on someone else, her eyes were clear and her posture was calm, completely different from her previous crying appearance. He was clearly not poisoned, but he pretended to be like that to deceive her. What does she mean? Is she playing a trick on her? Hu Kuei's eyes turned red, and the string of reason broke directly. So what if I did it? People like you don't deserve to live in this world. It's fine if you just pester others on a normal day, but you actually went so far as to sneak into someone's room in the middle of the night. Don't you have any sense of shame? You don't feel sick at all. Actually, just because of this? Xin Yun really wanted to knock open this guy's head to see if it was empty inside. Not to mention that this is just an exaggerated rumor. Even if she really did it, it has nothing to do with this guy, okay? To plot against someone for such a reason is simply a serious illness. Xin Yun was about to speak when she saw a man suddenly appear in front of Hu Kuei, raised his hand, and slapped her. Bang! A crisp slap was heard and the surroundings became quiet. Xin Yun couldn't help but narrow her eyes. The person who came was a middle-aged man in Taoist robes. He was also the elder of Lingcai Hall and Hu Kuei's third uncle. In the silence, Elder Hu scolded coldly. What the hell are you talking about? Hu Kuei came back to her senses from the slap and looked at him in disbelief. Third uncle. Elder Hu snorted coldly and stopped looking at her. He turned his gaze to Xin Yun, looked her over briefly, and then spoke slowly. My niece has been spoiled by her family. She speaks without restraint. Please don't blame me. Xin Yun did not comment. But Elder Hu turned over his hand and handed over a small grey bag. You were poisoned. It was my nephew's fault. I am deeply sorry that your cultivation was damaged. These are my compensation. After that, I will ask her to go home and she will no longer work in this spiritual materials hall. Please don't worry about it. After she finished speaking, before Xin Yun could even open her mouth, Hu Kuei was already getting anxious. Uncle San, why do you want to submit to her? Shut up. Elder Hu's voice was cold, and a sense of pressure acted on Hu Kuei. Hu Kuei shrank her neck and closed her mouth with a frustrated look on her face. Elder Hu then turned around and looked at Xin Yun. Waiting for an answer. Xin Yun smiled, turned her head, leaned on the female disciple's shoulder, and took her arm. Elder, this is not a matter of my cultivation being damaged, it's my life that is about to be lost. Elder Hu's expression did not change, he just took out another small grey bag of the same style. Hey, I feel dizzy and uncomfortable. How can this poison be so strong? Elder Hu's face twitched, and this time, he directly took out 3 small grey bags. Senior sister, if I die, can you tell brother Yu for me? Xin Yun, don't go too far. Hu Kuei couldn't help but speak again, breathing rapidly, obviously very angry. However, Xin Yun laughed despite her angry look. Are you unhappy? That's good, I'm starting to be happy. Tell senior brother Yu that I'm sorry for what happened last night, but I don't regret it. The female disciple's eyes widened. The people around couldn't help but open their mouths in amazement. What did they hear that they shouldn't have heard? Chapter 11 Liu Yin. In the silence, Hu Kuei, who was already angry, was the first to come back to his senses. He raised his finger and pointed at Xin Yun, his voice trembling. You are shameless. Xin Yun responded with a provocative smile. Is it useful to have face? Is she as attractive as the male lead? Seeing Hu Kuei getting angry and starting to mobilize her spiritual power, Xin Yun remained very calm. Sure enough, the next moment, Elder Hu reached out to stop her. With his other hand, he grabbed a storage ring out of thin air and put the 5 grey bags into it. The spiritual power floated and was sent in front of Xin Yun. Here are 5,000 low-grade spirit stones. Just as an apology. Can this matter be stopped here? Xin Yun smiled and stopped pretending. He stood up straight and took the storage ring in his hand. Elder Hu, although I am young, I have seen many scenes of educating children before I joined the sect. The summary is very simple: if a child is disobedient, just give him a beating. Hu Kuei wanted to speak, but she felt a ball of spiritual power blocking her throat, making her unable to make a sound. Elder Hu spoke in a calm tone. "That's right, don't worry, I will." As he spoke, he turned to look at Hu Kuei and his voice turned cold. "Come with me." Hu Kuei had no choice but to nod and turn around with him. Finally, he couldn't help but look at Xin Yun, as if he wanted to express something through his eyes. But before the emotion could be revealed, it was blocked by a hand and forced back. Xin Yun's spiritual sense swept across the storage ring in her hand, confirmed the number of spirit stones inside, and no longer paid attention to the uncle and nephew. She had known for a long time that this matter would not be a big deal. The Hu family has more than one elder in power in the Xianling sect, and how could she, a mere outer disciple, have the qualifications to compete with a family? So from the very beginning, her goal was to gain benefits. Show weakness to the enemy, find evidence, point out the plot, and make a conclusion on this matter in advance. When Elder Hu arrives, if he wants to save Hu Kuei, he will definitely choose to settle the matter privately. Because this incident happened in full view of the public, too many people knew the truth. If the disturbance continues, the sect's law enforcement hall will intervene. In order to ensure fairness and justice in the eyes of the sect's disciples, the law enforcement hall will definitely act impartially and will never dare to show favoritism or condone others. At that time, it would not be so easy for the Hu family to use their connections to rescue Hu Kuei. Settling it privately is the best way. For Xin Yun, instead of confronting a family head-on, it is better to use the enemy's resources to strengthen herself. Wait until you have the strength to compete with the enemy, and then settle today's grudge. For example, after recognizing the chief master of the first sword cultivator in the original text. It is never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. Before you have the strength, you have to survive and develop. After you have a backer, you have to rely on others for power. Xin Yun wrote down today's events in the little notebook in her heart, clasped her fists and thanked the people around her. "Thank you all for your help just now." He then bowed to the female disciple next to him. "Thank you, senior sister." The female disciple's eyes twitched and she opened her mouth, wanting to say something but stopping herself. "What help? Did it help you in this play?" Finally, she sighed softly and helped Xin Yun up. "You're welcome." Xin Yun stood up straight and smiled gently. The female disciple looked at her and spoke tentatively. "What you just said to junior brother Yu was true. Or did you just want to piss off Hu Kuei?" Xin Yun blinked, then looked helpless. "I think that's true, but..." She hadn't finished her words, but everyone present understood what she meant. The same is true for female disciples. "So, those rumors today are also false?" Xin Yun nodded. "I did go there yesterday, but I ran into the patrol team before I entered the bamboo forest." Although he had to continue being a bootlicker, he could not confirm the rumors and cause trouble for the male protagonist. She was afraid of being beaten. After hearing Xin Yun's explanation, everyone around nodded in sudden understanding. The female disciple laughed. "I suddenly feel that your junior sister is quite interesting." Xin Yun silently typed a question mark and was about to say something when she heard the female disciple change the subject. "By the way, what are you going to do next? Are you still taking on missions here?" "No." Xin Yun shook her head. "It will be a month before I complete my first year as a student, so I will not accept any missions for the time being." "So?" The female disciple nodded and smiled. "My name is Liu Yin. If you still plan to take on tasks related to refining equipment after 1 month, you can come find me. Basically, I will come to the spirit material hall once a day. This is a pleasant surprise." "Thank you, senior sister." Xin Yun thanked him and chatted with Liu Yin for a while. After most of the people around her had left, she said goodbye to them and left the Lingcai hall alone. After she walked away, Liu Yin thought for a moment and then entered room 107 with a few others. "Senior sister Liu, these skins are indeed poisonous fire lizard skins, but the fire poison has been completely removed. They are now processed leather. But from the look of her, she doesn't even know the water spirit jade exists. Without the water jade, how did she deal with these fire lizard skins without getting poisoned?" Several people looked at each other, none of them knew the answer. Liu Yin took a piece of fire lizard skin and felt it, and couldn't help but smile. This junior sister is really interesting. A room on the second floor of Lingcai Hall. Elder Hu waited for Hu Kuei to enter the room, then he waved his sleeves to close the door and looked at her with a grim expression. "Madness. You planned it, but you left the evidence unattended and you still dare to admit that you did it. Do you think you're going to die? Hu Kuei was not convinced. So what if she admits it? She's just an outer disciple. Even if she really dies, who will care? These words made Elder Hu's anger stuck in his throat. Finally, he shook his head in disappointment and sat down in the chair. Pack your things and go back to your parents. Don't worry about this anymore. I won't. Why should I leave? You are my third uncle, and you don't speak for me, but side with her, and you beat me for it. As Hu Kuei spoke, tears welled up in her eyes and her voice was filled with grievance. Elder Hu sighed and his tone became calmer. Did you know that the peak master came to see me last night? Hu Kuei was puzzled and answered with sobs. I know, Uncle San, you said that this morning. What the peak master is asking is about Xin Yun. Impossible. She is just an outer disciple with 3 spiritual roots. Why would the peak master ask her? Hu Kuei didn't even bother to cry, she was so excited, then seemed to have thought of something and said anxiously. She must have done something wrong, right? She did something wrong. Elder Hu sighed again and shook his head. No, from what I see from the peak master, I'm afraid he is planning to accept a disciple. Impossible. As Hu Kuei said this, her voice became weaker. Because she knew that her third uncle would never deceive her about such a big thing. But why? After you go back, practice at home peacefully and stop thinking about harming others. If Xin Yun really becomes the peak master's disciple, then my Hu family will not be able to mess with her. Do you understand? Hu Kuei nodded slowly. I see. In his lowered eyes, there was an emotion of unwillingness swirling around for a long time. Chapter 12. Do you still dare to come over? Xin Yun naturally didn't know about the conversation between the uncle and nephew of the Hu family. After leaving the spiritual materials hall, she saw that it was getting early, so she changed her route and went to a small market outside the mountain. He first sold the 30 bottles of high-level soul-nourishing pills returned by the system, and then used the 100 low-grade spirit stones returned to him to buy some low-level pills. For example, Qingling pills, Neihei pills, Weishang pills, Jeju pills, etc. The price of a bottle of this kind of medicine ranges from 3 to 10 low-grade spirit stones. She took a bottle as well, and she took quite a few kinds. Secondly, I found something good for Alu. A palm-sized stone slab inlaid with green crystal fragments. According to the shopkeeper, this thing is called an audio-visual board, inlaid with 2 kinds of spiritual materials, photo stone and sound stone, and is used to teach children to recognize words. The trinity of pictures, text and pronunciation provides children with an excellent learning experience. Xin Yun first marveled at the strange technology tree in this alien world, then tried its functions and bought it for 100 low-grade spirit stones. By the way, I also asked the boss to give me some gifts, more than a dozen cookbooks. I don't know what they are for, I just treat them as extras. Everything was done, and Xin Yun returned home. Because the small market was far away, it was already afternoon when we returned to the courtyard. Xin Yun pushed the door open while wondering whether she should get a spirit beast mount or something for transportation. The next moment, a beautiful figure rushed over and hugged her arms eagerly. His brows were furrowed and his face looked tense. Xin Yun hurriedly closed the gate. What's wrong? Alu opened her mouth, wanting to say something but couldn't, so she expressed her thoughts through communication. Xin Yun frowned immediately. You mean, someone came in? Alu nodded, then let go of her arm, walked to the gate of the courtyard, put her feet on the ground, and her expression became solemn, as if she was imitating. Under Xin Yun's gaze, Alu walked carefully across the yard step by step, pushed open the door that was only wide enough for one person, and slipped in. Xin Yun hurried to follow. After Alu entered the room, she walked a few steps to the table, looked at the bottle of medicine on the table, and her face changed and looked very ugly. This continued for a few breaths, and then she snorted coldly. You useless idiot. You didn't even give out a single bottle. You brought them all back. As soon as these imitative words came out, Xin Yun knew who it was. She has a headache. After resolving the inevitable death situation in the plot, shouldn't your life return to normal? How come this is getting more dangerous? Hu Kuei and the Hu family must be secretly planning how to get back their advantage. Li Qing had unilaterally turned against her, and no one knew whether they would vent their anger on her, a tool who knew nothing. This is too difficult. Xin Yun couldn't help but sigh. But there is currently no way to deal with this situation. If you are not strong enough to defeat the enemy, you can only wait for the enemy to make a move. He raised his hand and rubbed his hair to dispel his messy thoughts. Arlu also finished the second half of Li Qing's performance and came back, looking at her expectantly. I see. Thank you. In response, Arlu showed dissatisfaction, pulled up her finger and bit it. Meal. Xin Yun was silent and pulled her hand back. Let's go and practice. Since it is impossible for the time being, then just practice and improve your strength. Late at night, everything is quiet. Just like last night, Xin Yun quietly went out of the door and found her way to the bamboo forest where the male protagonist was. As he walked, he sorted the things in the storage ring. A low-level elixir worth 100 spirit stones, 5,000 low-grade spirit stones from the Hu family sold 30 bottles of high-level soul-nourishing elixirs and obtained 600 low-grade spirit stones, used 100 to buy the alien version of the learning machine, leaving 500. A total of 5,500 low-grade spirit stones. Well, the future is promising. Xin Yun couldn't help but quicken her pace. Soon, we arrived at our destination. She took a step out of the bamboo forest and walked towards the bamboo building, but felt a breeze blowing on her face, and the male protagonist was already standing in front of her. His eyes were sharp and his face was gloomy. Xin Yun was completely stunned. What's going on with this male protagonist? When the original owner came before, he was never seen once. She has only come twice this time and was caught both times. She silently took back the step she had taken. Then I heard Yu Qinan say in a cold voice, "You still dare to come here? Well, why not?" Xin Yun looked innocent. He handed the storage ring in his hand to the front with a bright smile. "I'm here to give something to my brother." Yu Qinan couldn't help but frown. Ignoring her action, he continued. "Let me ask you, what were you talking about in broad daylight, in public?" Xin Yun blinked, somewhat puzzled. What did she say? I recalled what I had said during the day. Could it be that? Xin Yun's expression became serious and she decided to deny it to the end. "Brother, I didn't say anything inappropriate." "Yeah." "Yes, brother, please believe me." Yu Qinan snorted lightly, took out a green stone, and sent spiritual power into it. Suddenly, a familiar voice came out. "Tell senior brother Yu that I'm sorry for what happened last night, but I don't regret it." Xin Yun? What the hell, a sound recording stone? A recording? What happened last night? What happened last night? You're sorry, but you don't regret it. Yu Qinan questioned through gritted teeth. Xin Yun broke out in a cold sweat. He laughed dryly, took a step forward, and extended his hand towards the sound stone. "Brother, where did you get this?" Yu Qinan watched her actions coldly. When Xin Yun suddenly sped up her movements and tried to snatch the sound stone, he raised his arm and lifted the stone in his hand directly above his head, leaving her empty-handed. Xin Yun missed her attack and could hardly maintain her smile. "Brother, have you ever heard that the things in the recording stone can be forged?" "So it?" "No." Yu Qinan said with certainty. "That's because you are ignorant, brother. This world is full of strange things, and there are endless ways to cheat. It's normal for a fake voice to appear." As she spoke, Xin Yun stood on tiptoe and grabbed the sound recording stone with one hand. Yu Qinan dodged it easily by turning sideways. "If it's fake, what do you want it for?" Xin Yun landed and stood still. "Well, I want to try and see if I can find evidence that it's fake." Hee hee. Yu Qinan couldn't help but sneer. "Even if you destroy this one, there are hundreds or even thousands of these things in the sect. How can you find them one by one and destroy them all?" "Hundreds and thousands." Xin Yun's eyes went dark. "Who did it? Don't you feel heartbroken by the despicable behavior of the unscrupulous media outlet Laoliu? It's too much, too much." After being angry for a long time, Xin Yun finally managed to regain her composure. Looking at Yu Qinan, he asked weakly, "What happened next?" "I did explain what happened next." Yu Qinan shook his head. "No, this is the only sentence that has spread throughout the sect." Xin Yun. "Damn Laoliu, don't let me find you." Chapter 13, Being Stalked. Xin Yun was angry in her heart, but her thoughts gradually became clear. There is a problem. These rumors are very problematic. Before Xin Yun traveled through time, she lived in an era of information explosion, so when she heard the rumors about her and the male protagonist this morning, she didn't think there was anything wrong with it. She subconsciously believed that it was normal for news to spread quickly. But this is the world of cultivation, with an ancient background. How could a gossip rumor spread so quickly to most of the sect's disciples just by word of mouth? And within just a few hours. And then there are the daytime things. Someone recorded her words on a sound stone. It could be said that this person was just in the mood, but hundreds of copies of the sound stone were scattered all over the sect. Xin Yun doesn't believe that there is no one behind this. Who is this person? Exaggerate what happened last night and take what happened during the day out of context. Their methods are different, but they all confirm her relationship with the male lead. Xin Yun was silent for a moment. Some people just can't figure out what the purpose of the person behind this is. To make enemies for her? To ruin the hero's reputation? Or, to make the hero hate her even more? Seeing her like this, Yu Qinan was not in a hurry. He waited until she almost came back to her senses before asking. What's on your mind? Xin Yun raised her eyes and looked at Yu Qinan seriously. Decided to go all out and admit the mistake first. I did say that, but at the time, I just said it to provoke people, there was no other meaning. When the matter was over, I gave an explanation and denied it, as well as the rumors that had spread earlier. I don't know how things turned out like this, but please believe me, I never intended to cause any trouble to you. Her eyes were sincere, yet hinted with uneasiness. Yu Qinan slowly lowered his arms and regained his composure. I know. Xin Yun was stunned. What? I know the whole thing about the spiritual materials hall. Xin Yun, oh. Then why are you questioning me? In her silence, Yu Qinan continued. You still don't understand the point. Whether it's Yun Siyu or Hu Kuei, they targeted you because of me. If you want a stable life in the future, give up the things you like as soon as possible. This makes a lot of sense, I can't refute it, but... There was more joy on Xin Yun's face. Brother, are you concerned about me? Yu Qinan's face turned dark. I'm advising you that it's impossible to do anything, so it's better to give up as soon as possible. Xin Yun couldn't help laughing. Okay, senior brother. I understand, senior brother. Yu Qinan's face turned even darker. How can this look of uncontrollable happiness make him look like he's about to give up? He took a deep breath and didn't continue the topic. From now on, don't talk nonsense outside. If someone with ulterior motives hears you, that's the result of these 2 times. Even if you don't mean that, it will be twisted into what they want it to mean. Be careful with your words and actions, and be more vigilant when dealing with others. Even if someone wants to do something, they won't be able to catch you doing it wrong. As for the 2 things that have already happened, don't worry about them. I will take care of them. Xin Yun suddenly felt that Yu Qinan was worthy of being the male lead. He was polite and responsible. Even to her, an annoying bootlicker, he didn't say anything particularly harsh. He even tried to reason with her. It's just too good to be true. Unfortunately, he became a demon later on. Xin Yun was lost in thought, her face filled with a dazed look. Yu Qinan looked away. The tone became more serious. Did you hear that? Xin Yun came back to her senses and nodded obediently. Yeah, got it, brother. Yu Qin was silent. His intuition told him that it wasn't. He pursed his lips and gave the order stiffly. Go back and practice hard. In this world, strength is king. Good. Xin Yun answered. Then, he handed the storage ring in his hand to Yu Qinan. Brother, keep these. They may be useful to you. What are you doing? A loud shout was heard, and a burning spiritual power rushed towards him. Xin Yun was startled and subconsciously wanted to hide. But Yu Qinan turned his head, and spiritual power burst out of his body, easily blocking the attack. Xin Yun breathed a sigh of relief and forced the storage ring into Yu Qinan's hand. The next moment, the system prompt sounded. Ding, gift successful. The tenfold effect has been stored in the backpack, please extract it yourself. At this time, Xin Yun naturally had no intention of listening carefully and turned to look at the person who came. More than a dozen sect disciples all looked at this side with complicated expressions. At the front was a girl in pink, her beautiful eyes filled with anger, and in her hand, she was tightly grasping a long red whip. Damn it, heroine. Xin Yun hurriedly took a step back to distance herself from Yu Qinan. She still has some self-awareness. The dog licks until the end and ends up with nothing, and the male protagonist belongs to the female protagonist, well, the female protagonists. Yun Siyu stared at Xin Yun's direction and walked closer step by step. Haven't you been beaten enough? Xin Yun couldn't help but sigh in her heart. It was a bad idea. If she had known someone was waiting for her tonight, she shouldn't have come. Now that I've been caught by the heroine, I'm afraid I can't escape from being beaten. As for resistance, a Hu family, she can still work hard, and in the future she will be able to make a breakthrough. This Yun Siyu, the daughter of the leader of a large immortal sect, the heroine in the plot, and one of the hero's lovers. She really has no courage. Of course, the most important point is that you don't have enough strength and you can't resist even if you want to. Xin Yun calmed down. Be prepared to be beaten. She watched helplessly as the long red whip filled with spiritual energy and flickered with flames as it came towards her. In the end, I couldn't help it and moved my feet. However, a transparent spiritual power shield appeared all around, blocking the long whip. Yu Chenan's voice was cold. Yun Siyu. The sect strictly prohibits private fighting and harming fellow disciples. As the daughter of the sect master, you don't set an example yourself, but instead break the law knowingly. Yesterday, you attacked someone for no reason and caused him to fall unconscious. Are you planning to do it again today? Is this what your father taught you? Every word is a gem and every sound is shocking. Xin Yun was completely stunned. Brother, is this what you should say? The one opposite is the heroine, one of your future wives. What are you trying to do? To heaven. You were not like this when you were talking to me just now. Not only her, but the people on the opposite side were also surprised when they heard these words. Yun Siyu was even more angry. Who am I doing this for? Brother you have a good character and think it's unnecessary to hurt others, but some things can only be learned through beatings. Only by making her feel pain can she know what to do and what not to do, and what is right and what is wrong. Instead of trying to reason with her in a gentle manner like you did, you gave her hope and made her cling to you shamelessly. Xin Yun glanced sideways. That makes sense. That's not right. How could she think that it was right for the heroine to hit her? Was she out of her mind to get beaten up? Chapter 14 Happy Carrot. Before Xin Yun could recover from Yun Siyu's sensible words, Yu Chenan had already spoken. The voice is cold. For whom? For me? And then you disregard my will and vent your emotions based on your own subjective thoughts. He took a step forward. You once asked me about her, and I told you clearly that this matter has nothing to do with you, so don't get involved. You didn't care at all and hurt someone, and you still dare to say it was for me. Yun Siyu was speechless for a moment. Then he changed his target, with his spiritual power surging, and whipped Xin Yun. It's all because of you? Xin Yun? What? You can't win the argument, so you get angry and start fighting? She suddenly felt that what Yu Chenan said just now was correct. Yun Siyu was pretending to be doing this for Yu Chenan. The real reason was that she was displeased with her and wanted to beat her up. Xin Yun gathered her spiritual power and moved to the side. But then I saw a hand reaching out to the front and firmly grasping the long whip. When she looked, it was Yu Chenan. The man looked calm, and spiritual power flowed from his hands into the whip, thereby taking control of the whip. Then, he swung it violently. Yun Siyu didn't have time to let go and was thrown out by the force. It hit the ground hard. Xin Yun, Armikran. Yu Chenan looked down at Yun Siyu who had fallen to the ground. I will tell the sect master the whole story. Whether you are right or wrong will be decided by the sect master. Yun Siyu's eyes suddenly turned red. He sniffed, and finally said nothing. He turned over, circulated his spiritual power and flashed away. That look is so pitiful. But Xin Yun just felt refreshed. Putting aside other factors, he was beaten up by Yun Siyu as soon as he came here, and he almost got beaten up again just now. She was very happy when someone stood up for her and beat her back. Xin Yun couldn't control the smile on her face. But I heard a cold rebuke. And you? Xin Yun shuddered. He straightened his back subconsciously and looked at Yu Chenan who spoke. Yu Chenan paused, and his tone became a little stiff. I tolerate you because I think there is no need to hurt fellow disciples over trivial matters, but if you continue like this, we will meet in the ring next time. Okay, senior brother, I understand, senior brother. Xin Yun answered immediately, her tone relaxed and happy. I didn't listen at first glance. Yu Chenan's face darkened and he spoke in a heavier tone. Roll. Oh, okay. Xin Yun nodded, turned around, and walked out happily. Looks like he's happier. Yu Qinan. Xin Yun was naturally happy. At the beginning, she felt a little uncomfortable when she found out that she was going to be beaten by the heroine. Even though she couldn't help herself and decided to resist in the end, she knew in her heart that she was not strong enough and could not avoid it. But after the hero blocked the heroine's attack and confronted her, she was stunned. Is it reasonable for the hero to argue with the heroine over a minor villain? It's unreasonable. Xin Yun has already started to think divergently, wondering if the male protagonist is not that disgusted with her. But now she understands. Yu Qinan was just well educated and felt there was no need to hit people. However, Yun Siu came over and beat him up even though Yu Qinan had clearly told her not to interfere, and she still used Yu Qinan as an excuse. This will make anyone angry. So it's normal to say harsh words, right? Let's see what happens in the end. Let the clan leader decide who is right and who is wrong. Who is the clan leader? Yun Siu's biological father. Can he really do anything to his own daughter? No. Although Yu Qinan was angry, he still couldn't bear to see Yun Siu get hurt. Even though he mentioned the sex laws, in the end, he still couldn't bear to see her get hurt. Isn't he this love? As for her, listening to his later words, it is obvious that he still hates her. This is normal. And even though the plot was normal, Yun Siu, who disliked her, suffered a loss by accident. Shouldn't she be happy? Happy. Xin Yun walked out of the bamboo forest, looked up, and saw a man standing in the air with a sword, his eyes looking straight ahead. Seems to be looking at something. Xin Yun subconsciously glanced back. From such a distance, you shouldn't be able to see what is happening in the middle of the bamboo forest, right? Then the man on the sword moved his eyes and looked over. Xin Yun suppressed her emotions and walked forward to pay her respects. Hello, senior brother Lin. Lin Zizhua was silent for a moment, then controlled the flying sword to descend. May I give you a ride? Yes, thank you, brother Lin. Xin Yun hurriedly stood up. Lin Zizhua said nothing, and controlled his flying sword to rise into the air, flying towards the direction he had noted down last night. The cold wind is howling. Having experienced flying a sword once, Xin Yun was no longer afraid. In a good mood, she began to pay attention to the scenery along their way. Bright moon, numerous stars, cloudless sky, quiet and beautiful. Yu Qinan. A deep voice sounded from the front. Xin Yun came back to her senses and looked over. Lin Zizhua paused for a moment before continuing. It's good for you. Xin Yun deeply agreed with this. Not everyone can be polite to a bootlicker who is clinging to them, but the male protagonist did it. Senior brother Yu is a good man. Xin Yun said affirmatively. Lin Zizhua turned his head slightly, as if he wanted to look back at her, but in the end, he didn't. He just suddenly increased the speed of the flying sword under his feet. Xin Yun was about to say the following words when she was frightened by this and immediately gave up the idea of continuing. He looked at Lin Zizhua a little confused. She thought this person wanted to chat, but he just said one sentence. But thinking that she was still holding Lin Zizhua's sword, Xin Yun calmed down. Their driver master can do whatever he wants. There was no more conversation after that. Lin Zizhua sent Xin Yun to the place and left in a hurry. After riding the flying sword again and avoiding a long journey, Xin Yun kept a good mood and walked into her own courtyard. Closed the door and opened the formation. He first pushed Arlu who was approaching him away, then walked over and sat on the chair. Next, let us see what we've harvested this time. Xin Yun opened the system and found the previous broadcast interface. 1 bottle of Qingling pill with 10 times the effect, 1 bottle of Neihe pill with 10 times the effect, 1 bottle of Bigu pill with 10 times the effect, 55,000 low-grade spirit stones, audio-visual simulation space, 50 cubic meters of storage ring, have been stored in the backpack, please extract it by yourself. She bought a series of low-level medicinal pills for experimentation, and the effects were just what she wanted, so there was nothing much to say. There is no problem with the spirit stones and storage ring, that was already expected. But this audio-visual simulation space. Xin Yun opened the system backpack and found a green rectangular jade plate in one of the small grids. On it, there is a big word. Xin Yun was silent for a moment and then knocked on the system. What does this mean? Items are returned, with a chance to crit at 10 times the effect. Critical hit. She understood this word, which was often used in games to refer to a huge additional bonus. So, Achieving a critical hit means that the effect of this thing has exceeded the original 10 times. Oh shit, why didn't the Spirit Stone achieve a critical hit? Chapter 15 Audio-Visual Simulation Space. Xin Yun felt a little heartbroken. Although a tenfold return of Spirit Stones is already very impressive, who doesn't he want more small change? Of course, she also understood that having a probability represented a small probability, and it would definitely not be an easy task. So he calmed down and took out the green jade plate. As soon as you get your hands on the jade, you can feel its warmth, as if it were a living thing. When you take a closer look at it, it is even more transparent and clear, without a trace of impurities. I just don't know what functions it has. As soon as this thought came to my mind, I felt a stream of information flowing into my mind. The audio-visual simulation space can input teaching content to form a spiritual space, which can increase the learning efficiency tenfold. Xin Yun was shocked. Is this a critical hit? Is this too exaggerated? Her eyes were bright and she looked up at Arlu, who was standing in front of her with an innocent look on her face. Hey. Arlu? About half a quarter of an hour later, Arlu Xin Yun held the jade board in her hand, closed her eyes, and entered the spiritual space as a learner. As the eyes moved, the man and the ghost arrived in a bright classroom. There are neatly arranged tables and chairs in the room, with books on the table. Outside the window, green shades overlap and clouds roll. Xin Yun suddenly felt like she had returned to those turbulent days of her youth. She sighed and reached out of the window. Bang! Her hand hit a hard landscape board. Fake, is it fake? The feeling was gone in an instant. Xin Yun had a complicated expression. However, a young man who looked similar to a top star in his previous life walked out of nowhere from a classroom door, holding a book in his left hand and a pointer in his right hand. He walked to the podium, put down the book, and tapped the desk with his fingers. Students, look at me. Today is our first lesson. We will not teach anything complicated. Let's start with the core values of socialism. Xin Yun couldn't help but raise the corners of her mouth. She admitted that inputting this teaching content with her own will had some bad taste, but when this scene was actually presented, she still. He raised his hand to cover his mouth, forcing himself to control himself, then sat in his seat next to Xin. Wait until the young teacher started reciting with Arlu, who looked confused. Prosperity and democracy. Xin Yun hurriedly exited the spiritual space, opened her eyes, and couldn't help laughing out loud. A new century socialist kid, sounds very exciting. After laughing for a long while, Xin Yun calmed down, put Arlu aside and focused on her studies. He went to the bed, sat cross-legged and began to practice. At the same time, I was also thinking about what to do next. The audio-visual board triggered a critical hit and turned into the current simulation space, which was a pleasant surprise. But how to make reasonable use of this surprise is what she needs to consider. The gifts given to the male protagonist before were all items, and when they were returned, they were also mechanically processed according to quality and quantity. But if you think about it carefully, cultivation techniques, magic, martial arts, etc. should also be given as gifts. Although these are not dead objects, they can be turned into dead objects through recording. At that time, if the quantity is multiplied by 10, and she gets 10 books or something, she will have no objection, but if the quality is multiplied by 10, then even the worst martial arts book may become a top-notch one. What if there is another critical hit? Xin Yun has already begun to look forward to herself. After obtaining the top-level martial arts, her cultivation speed will increase rapidly, her cultivation level will soar, and she will become stronger day by day, and she will be able to defeat all-powerful enemies. Calm down. Xin Yun took a deep breath to calm her pounding heart. Keep thinking. The audio-visual simulation space forms a spiritual space and does not include the body. It cannot be used for practicing martial arts, but it is definitely a magical tool for practicing magic and martial arts. She will have 10 times the learning efficiency. And when she practices magic and martial arts, the effect is 10 times the system return. Xin Yun opened her eyes and felt a little restless. Since it is possible to have something better, how can we be content to use something bad? She jumped out of bed, took out a yellowed copy of Xianling Ju from the cupboard, then found a pen and paper and wrote down all the techniques in her mind. She stuffed all these into her arms and wanted to go out to find the male protagonist. But when he reached the door, he hesitated again. It doesn't seem good to go there just after I got back. Yu Qinan just got angry tonight and warned her not to go. If she went, what if she got beaten? Also, even though Yun left, not all the people who followed her have left. In case of another collision. Given the confrontation between her and Yun tonight, there would be no shortage of rumors in the sect tomorrow. If she is discovered again, it will add fuel to the fire. Forget it. Xin Yun turned around and walked back, sat on the edge of the bed and then lay back. You absolutely can't go tonight. Wait until tomorrow or 2 more days. In addition to the martial arts, she also prepared some elixirs, spiritual weapons, etc., and gave them to the male protagonist, trying to reduce the frequency of visiting the male protagonist so as not to be too deeply involved in the plot. After lying down for a while, Xin Yun put all her thoughts aside and sat up. No matter how small a mosquito is, it is still meat. So practice. Although she was inevitably emotionally agitated, with the help of the calming effect of the Qingling pill, which had 10 times the effect, Xin Yun was able to calm down and practice with peace of mind for 3 days. His cultivation level is still at the 4th level of qi refining and he has not been able to break through. But during these 3 days, through the audio-visual simulation space, Alu learned most of the common sense. Nowadays, communication is no problem. On this day, Xin Yun finished her practice at noon, made some adjustments, put Alu, who was leaning on her, on the bed, and got out of bed carefully. But after the training was over, the spiritual power no longer dissipated, and Alu woke up. He floated out of bed and followed Xin Yun. Is Yun going out? Take Alu with you, Alu wants to go with you. Xin Yun was helpless. What if you and I are discovered? This is a sect, there are cultivators everywhere. No, no. Alu moved closer, first rubbed Xin Yun's shoulder, then her body shape changed and shrank rapidly. But after a while, it turned into a dark green, closed umbrella-shaped hairpin, floating in the air. Alu's little face appeared above the umbrella. That won't happen. Xin Yun was surprised and suspicious. This little brat, could he become like this? She tried to observe the hairpin with the spiritual consciousness of a practitioner. I can't detect any breath at all, and even if I see it, I will just think it's a dead object. That's fine. But we cannot rule out the possibility that she could not see it because her cultivation level was too low. Take me with you, Yun. The little face on the umbrella looked at her eagerly, and Xin Yun was silent for a while. All right. Anyway, she couldn't come into contact with any powerful monks, so it wasn't a big problem. After washing and tidying herself up, Xin Yun half tied up her long hair, pinned the hairpin that had transformed into a lu on her head, and then went out. Today, she needs to go to the small market again to buy all the items she wants at once, and then wait for an opportunity to give them to the male protagonist along with the skills. Chapter 16 Quiet Atmosphere. The temperature at noon is scorching, and being in it feels like being in a furnace. Only the occasional cool breeze can relieve some of the scorching heat. Xin Yun was walking on the road, seemingly calm on the surface, but in fact, she was secretly paying attention to her surroundings. The 2 previous rumors proved that someone was targeting her, and on the night 3 days ago, she was caught by someone while looking for the male lead. It is conceivable that after 3 days of fermentation, those random news became what they are today. Xin Yun could say that no matter what she heard next, she would not be surprised. He walked forward slowly, and after a while, he ran into some outer disciples. Some were chatting, some were rushing to do something, and some were standing on the side of the road in a daze. Xin Yun pricked up her ears silently. However, the scene suddenly became quiet. Most of the people who were chatting shut their mouths. Looking towards her, she saw someone who was still talking, but the next second he was reminded by his companions and became extremely quiet. Their eyes were complicated. There was surprise, dissatisfaction, envy, and unwillingness, but no one spoke. Everyone kept their mouths tightly shut, which made Xin Yun, who wanted to know how things were developing, suddenly feel awkward. In particular, everyone's eyes were moving slowly as she moved forward. Xin Yun walked over in silence, with a head full of question marks. What is going on here? She continued forward and met many more disciples. But without exception, after noticing her, they would shut their mouths and quietly watch her walk past. Until she walked out of the accommodation area, Xin Yun didn't hear any useful information. The only thing that is certain is that the incident happened and she became famous in the sect again. This was expected. But now she wanted to know, why were these people able to suppress their inner gossipy souls and not chat or talk? Do you want to share? Do you want to complain? Why don't you talk about it and let me hear it? Xin Yun was a little depressed. But you can't take the initiative to approach and force anyone to start a conversation. So, she had to suppress her curiosity and continue her plan to go to the small market. I rented an ostrich from the sect for transportation. It took me 15 minutes to get to the small market, buy something, and then it took me another 15 minutes to get back. Xin Yun's mood gradually worsened. The round trip, including the time spent shopping, took a total of 1 hour. During the entire process, all the disciples who recognized her were eerily quiet. Those who did not recognize her would be reminded by others and become quiet. Then, these quiet people all stared at her with an expression of, I know, but I won't tell you, from the moment they appeared to the moment they left. This strange atmosphere gave Xin Yun the illusion that the world was broken. I'm almost going crazy. She wanted to grab someone at random, shake him vigorously, and shout. Go ahead and tell me, just tell me what you know. In the end, Xin Yun used her reason to control her impulse. But my mood was inevitably affected. Yun is not happy. A worried voice came through the connection. Xin Yun took a deep breath and replied. Don't worry, it's nothing. Obviously. Alu said affirmatively. Then he paused, as if talking to himself. Adi should do something to make Yun happy. Xin Yun laughed a little. This kid has learned common sense, but his mind is still very simple. All kinds of words, whether appropriate or inappropriate, might come out of her mouth, which is quite funny. Xin Yun's bad mood disappeared a little. Decided not to think too much about the strange phenomena I encountered today. Go back to the courtyard and wait until tonight. Master Peak Yang. Are you sure? Want to go? Walk. Behind him, a muffled voice came from 100 meters away. Xin Yun slowly stopped and began to recall carefully. During this hour, everyone would become quiet after seeing her, but there were also some who did not stop in time because she was riding the ostrich so fast, or who would continue talking after she walked away. In this situation, she didn't hear it clearly. The only thing she could be sure of was that she and the male protagonist were not mentioned in any of the topics. Therefore Xin Yun didn't care. After all, her purpose was just to know the development of things related to her through other people's mouths. But now that I think about it carefully, I find something wrong. There was a person named Yarn Li who was mentioned repeatedly, and many people were discussing going to the sect Master Peak to look for this Yarn Li. Xin Yun had no idea who this person was. But she had a feeling that if she followed it, she might find the answer. Do it when you think of it. Xin Yun drove the ostrich under her to change direction and move towards the main peak. He was far behind some people and it took him half an hour to arrive outside the courtyard of an inner sect disciple. There were huge crowds of people there, but not a single noise. Everyone remained quiet, looking ahead, as if waiting for something. Xin Yun was stunned. Can people really be so self-sufficient? Or, what important thing made them become like this? Xin Yun jumped off the ostrich, let it wait aside, then took a step and quietly blended into the crowd. Everyone's attention was focused on the front, and no one noticed Xin Yun, so she avoided the previous, quiet, treatment. Xin Yun stood at the end, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. Finally, it stopped on a little fat man. The little fat boy had ordinary looks and ordinary cultivation, and was inconspicuous in the crowd. But at this moment, his face was full of excitement, and he covered his mouth with his hands, as if he was controlling his urge to speak. Xin Yun felt a gossip spirit from him that was more powerful than that from anyone else. So she walked over quietly and patted the little fat boy on the shoulder. The little fat boy was startled and turned around with an angry look. But when he saw Xin Yun's appearance clearly, his expression was filled with surprise. Xin Yun smiled. Said in an inaudible voice. Do you know me? The little fat boy moved his mouth as if he wanted to answer, but controlled himself the next second. He shook his head, stepped back, and distanced himself from Xin Yun. Xin Yun. She just wanted to find out some information, why was it so difficult? Xin Yun took a deep breath and decided to try again. Then, the sound of a sword rang out in the sky. Everyone's gaze shifted to the sky, and their emotions suddenly became agitated. Xin Yun raised her eyes to look. Yu Qinan came over on a flying sword, his clothes fluttering, like a banished immortal. Behind him, there was a middle-aged elder with a grim face. The two flew one after the other to the center of the crowd and landed at the same time. The next moment, Yu Qinan's cold voice resounded throughout the venue. Yu Qinan is here to pay a visit, please ask senior brother Yang to come out and meet him. Xin Yun, oh. What are you doing? A visit? What kind of visit? The kind that involves physical contact. No, male protagonist, what's wrong with you? There's nothing like this in the original text. Chapter 17 Love. Xin Yun was greatly shocked by the male protagonist's behavior, and in front of her, the gate of the courtyard was tightly closed, and no one answered. The scene fell silent again. Xin Yun withdrew her gaze, stretched out her hand, and put it on the little fat boy's shoulder. This little brother, can you help me? Inconvenient. The fat boy shook his head, his tone firm. Xin Yun pretended not to hear and continued. From the reactions of my junior brother and other fellow disciples, I think this matter has something to do with me. But I haven't been out for 3 days, so I really don't know what happened. I was full of doubts along the way, which really bothered me. Could you please help me solve this problem, little brother? She looked sincere and had a positive attitude. But the little fat boy could feel the force exerted by the hand on his shoulder, making it difficult to break free. He thought for a moment and asked in a low voice. You really don't know? Xin Yun nodded. I really don't know. The little fat boy looked conflicted and after a while he started shaking his head. Xin Yun said hurriedly. Little senior brother, what exactly are you worried about? If it has anything to do with me and senior brother Yu, I promise that nothing will happen to you, okay? The fat boy glanced at her. What's the use of your promise? But the little fat boy narrowed his eyes into a slit and thought for a while. I can tell you, but you can't tell anyone else. I said it. Of course. So the two of them left the crowd and retreated to a corner. The little fat boy looked ahead with excitement. 3 days ago, 2 pieces of news spread like wildfire within the sect. You are the person involved, so you should also know that the truth was covered up, and what was spread was a rumor based on the incident itself. Xin Yun nodded to show that she understood. But doubts arose in my heart. 2 messages. She sneaked into the male protagonist's place late at night and something happened, and admitted it the next morning. So what about the time she was caught by the female protagonist that night? It didn't spread. The fat boy had no idea what she was thinking and continued. Our senior brother Yu usually keeps a low profile. He only appears when necessary and practices in seclusion. But someone has gone too far in this matter. Senior brother Yu mobilized people to investigate the source of the rumor early the other morning. You don't know until you check, and you'll be shocked when you check. Guess what? More than a dozen people have been spreading rumors in various occasions. Even the part you said was deliberately intercepted and reproduced by them and sent out. Xin Yun's heart was calm, but her face showed shock and anger. Why would they do that? The little fat boy narrowed his eyes and clicked his tongue twice. After all, it's jealousy that's the cause of all this. The Xianling sect has 4 auxiliary peaks for alchemy, weapons, talismans and arrays. Among them, Ding Yi, the son of the alchemy peak master, did not follow his father in the alchemy path, but learned the sword path instead. His cultivation talent is not bad, with a single gold spiritual root, but his talent in swordsmanship is not as good as expected. But he doesn't admit this. He often says that his slow progress in swordsmanship is because he has no famous teacher to guide him, so he has always wanted to find a top swordsman as his teacher. As for the top sword cultivators, there are 2 in our sect. One is Uncle Pastor, who is known as the #1 sword cultivator in the cultivation world, and the other is our sect master. Mu Rui. Xin Yun was slightly startled when she heard the sudden mention of this cheap master. Then the little fat man continued. Since Uncle Pastor became famous, he has only brought back brother Lin Zizhua Lin a few years ago and accepted him as his apprentice. Ding Yi tried to become a disciple but failed. He couldn't even meet the pastor uncle, so he changed his target and set his sights on the sect leader. Our sect leader has accepted disciples in the past few years, but they were all registered disciples who did not follow the sword path. Ding Yi always felt that the position of personal disciple would be his sooner or later. At this point, Xin Yun understood. As soon as the male protagonist entered the sect, he was accepted as a personal disciple by the sect leader and taught the way of the sword. So, Ding Yi holds a grudge against senior brother Yu because he failed to become the sect master's direct disciple. The little fat boy clasped his palms together and nodded. Yes, that's it. Senior brother Yu keeps a low profile and rarely gets involved in other things, so Ding Yi can't target him, so he's targeting you, this weakness. Xin Yun. Broken floor? A disciple of the sect master is hanging out with an outer sect disciple who is nothing. Wouldn't his reputation be ruined immediately? Xin Yun's face turned black. What do you mean by nothing? What do you mean by bad reputation? Am I that bad? But the little fat boy came closer and spoke even more quietly. But I guess this is just one of Ding Yi's purposes. After all the news that came out cannot withstand careful scrutiny. Half of the people believe it. Even if senior brother Yu ignores it, someone will tell the truth. So the main purpose of Ding Yi's petty mind is to deliberately muddy up your relationship and disgust senior brother Yu even though he knows that senior brother Yu doesn't like you. Xin Yun. There is a swear word that I don't know whether I should say or not. She endured it, and endured it again and again. Finally, considering her own strength, she just opened the little notebook in her heart and made a heavy note. After finishing the stroke, the mood eased a little. And then? What did senior brother Yu do in the past 3 days? The little fat boy turned his head and looked at the crowd of people in front of him. After senior brother Yu found out the truth, he sent a letter of challenge to Ding Yi, the 13 people who took advantage of the situation and spread rumors, and the 5 people who were just gossiping. He also brought the referee elder to challenge them. But anyone can see that the challenge and the referee are just a cover. He is here to beat people up. And on the first day, senior brother Yu clearly gave these people 2 choices. Either have a fight or kneel down and apologize and admit your mistakes. Xin Yun looked forward. The crowd was so crowded that Yu Qinan could not be seen at all. She continued to ask. If it's a challenge, those people can refuse it, right? The sect stipulates that if the party whose interests are damaged challenges the party that caused the incident, the party that caused the incident has no right to refuse. Then you can drag it, right? Of course, that person chose to drag it out yesterday, so senior brother Yu first paid the spiritual stones as compensation, and then demolished that person's courtyard. 1 challenge a day. Yes, today is the 3rd day, this is the 3rd one. Xin Yun stopped asking. She already understood why everyone was so silent. Because he didn't dare, for fear that he would gossip too much and say something he shouldn't, which would cause Yu Qinan to come to his door and beat him up. As for her, it was just because she was another party involved and it happened incidentally. She couldn't help but think of Yu Qinan's words that night. Don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. This is the solution. It actually made everyone afraid and they dared not speak nonsense anymore. I just love it. Xin Yun strode forward, using her spiritual power to squeeze through the crowd and reach the inner circle. Then he walked quickly towards Yu Qinan with a cheerful voice. Senior brother. Chapter 18. Let's sit down and wait. A familiar voice came from behind him, and Yu Qinan's body stiffened, and he inexplicably had a bad premonition. Sure enough, the next moment, Xin Yun appeared in front of him, her eyes full of admiration. Senior brother. Yu Qinan looked into her eyes, pursed his lips, and said coldly. You're blocking me. Oh. Xin Yun answered obediently. She took a small step to the side and continued to look up at him. Yu Qinan was silent for a while. As if explaining. I did these things only because the rumors implicated me, and there is no other meaning. Xin Yun nodded. Yeah, I understand. Yu Qinan is the male protagonist, and she is just a minor villain, and she is also a bootlicker. In this case, it was good enough that Yu Qinan didn't hate her. How could he possibly go and beat someone up for her? In other words, although this matter involved both of them, in real life, it had a greater impact on her. For example, Hu Kuei believed the rumors and made things difficult for her. If it were Yu Qinan, these people would not dare to do anything. Therefore, even if Yu Qinan was doing this for himself, his actions were still beneficial to Xin Yun. She should be thankful. As for how to thank her for being a bootlicker, no matter what she does, it is reasonable. Seeing that Xin Yun agreed, Yu Qinan continued in a cold voice. Now that you understand, don't stay here and get in my way. Xin Yun grinned. Is that so, senior brother Yu? This matter involves me after all. I am not as good as my senior brother in investigating the matter so quickly. I also don't have the strength to do this job of challenging him. So I thought, at least by following my senior brother, I can make it easier for him in other aspects. Yu Qinan frowned, puzzled. Then Xin Yun took 2 steps, raised her hand and summoned a leather chair, and placed it behind him. It's the kind of distance that you can sit on directly. Yu Qinan? In silence, Xin Yun ran to the front and pressed Yu Qinan down on the seat. He flipped his hand and took out some small bags. This is dragon beard cake, this is pea yellow, this is osmanthus cake, this is candied fruit. She spoke and stuffed a small bag into Yuchinan's hand. She spoke again and stuffed one. She spoke again and stuffed another. Soon, Yuchinan's arms were filled with neatly arranged small bags. Yuchinan. If I'm not mistaken, he came here to fight, right? The same question also appeared in the minds of everyone around, making the atmosphere on the scene become a little weird. In other words, the atmosphere of the whole venue began when Xin Yun rushed out of the crowd. Xin Yun didn't care what these people were thinking. She picked up the things one by one, while also listening to the system's announcement. Ding, gift successful. 10 bags of dragon beard crisps, 10 bags of pea yellow, 10 times the effect of osmanthus cake, critical effect candied fruit. Then, when he caught a glimpse of Yuchinan's expression changing, he hurriedly stopped the introduction. Push the big head that you prepared earlier over and take 2 steps back. Brother, although we are here to challenge and seek justice, we cannot wrong ourselves and let those people stay comfortably inside while we stand outside, waiting in the hot sun. She took out an oil paper umbrella, opened it, and held it above Yuchinan's head to block out the sunlight. Why don't you sit down, have some snacks, drink something nice, take a rest and adjust your state while waiting? If the guy named Yang Li inside doesn't understand my kindness and doesn't seize the opportunity one give him, then it won't matter if I take action again. Everyone around was stunned. Injustice to yourself. Unclear good intentions. Give me a chance. Weren't you the ones blocking the door, insisting on beating someone up unless that person kneels down and apologizes? Also, while the people inside are too frightened to come out to fight, you are outside relaxing and eating and drinking. Are you sure that this is not a provocation? There are too many complaints, but no one dares to complain. And the people in the courtyard finally couldn't help themselves when Yuchinan was distracted by the small bag in his arms. You guys are going too far. A red blade light shot out along with this shout. Xin Yun was shocked. Just as I was about to move, I felt someone pulling me, and I staggered and passively moved towards the crowd. Yes, behind Yuchinan. Yuchinan sat in the chair without moving. His left hand held the small bags, and his right hand had not yet let go of Xin Yun's clothes. However, a golden sword light appeared out of nowhere, and it arrived first, splitting the red knife light into 2 halves. Xin Yun realized what had happened later. Looking up at the dazzling golden sword light that was slowly disappearing, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He is worthy of being the male lead. He possesses a rare Holy Spirit root that is rare in the world and masters the power of light. He is so awesome. Compared with it, my own 3 spiritual roots are nothing to mention. While he was thinking, a sturdy, dark-skinned boy jumped out from the courtyard wall. His right arm was bare, and he was dragging a large knife in his right hand, his expression full of anger. He stood still on the ground, raised the big knife in his hand and pointed it at Yuchinan. It's just a few idle words. Why do you have to come to my house and fight with me? Yuchinan's eyes turned cold. But he did not explain and turned to look at the referee who came with him. The elder referee broke away from his lazy standing state and spoke slowly. Now that you are out, you should accept the challenge. This battle is not limited to any venue or means. The only thing you need to pay attention to is to stop when you are done and not to hurt anyone's life. I won't say much else, let's get started. As the last note fell, Yang Li's spiritual power surged and he rushed forward. Don't think that I'm really afraid of you. He shouted, and when he was 5 steps away from Yuchinan, he suddenly jumped up. A raging fire ignited on the big knife, leaving a semicircular flame in the air. And when the momentum of the sword turned to fall, the blade was suddenly covered with a heavy earth color. The 2 colors mixed together and fell heavily towards Yuchinan. It was getting closer. But then I heard a crisp, ding sound. A silver-white longsword that had never been unsheathed was held in Yuchinan's right hand and placed horizontally above his head, easily blocking Yang Li's powerful attack. Yang Li's expression changed slightly. But he felt a terrifying force coming from the knife. Yuchinan held the sword in one hand and slowly stood up from the chair. With the strength of a single hand, he blocked the sword that Yang Li was pushing down with all his strength. Yang Li was still trying to increase his strength. But in front of him, a dazzling golden light suddenly burst out from Yuchinan's body, and countless golden sword shadows condensed out of thin air and shot towards him. He had no time to hide. The golden sword shadows hit his body, tearing his clothes, skin, flesh, and even gnawing at his bones. Yang Li flew backwards and fell to the ground. I raised my head subconsciously. But he felt something piercing between his lips, breaking his teeth and blocking his throat. Yarn Li came back to his senses and looked. It's a scabbard. He looked up again. Yu Qinan looked frighteningly cold. Your few idle words have caused others to bear unwarranted stigma and suffer undeserved disasters. Chapter 19. Are you cheap? Everything happened so fast that the onlookers were unable to react in time. Including Xin Yun. I clearly saw Yarn Li leap up and slash with a powerful sword, but how come he was defeated the next second? What followed was inexplicable shock. They are both in the foundation building stage, but the gap between them is too big, isn't it? Everyone sighed, and there was more fear in their eyes when they looked at Yu Qinan. As soon as Yu Qinan said this, he felt something was wrong and frowned slightly. He glanced back and then quickly retracted his gaze. He used the sword to force Yarn Li to raise his head. His voice was cold. This time, it's just a warning. If it happens again, I will make sure you can't open your mouth. Yarn Li was terrified. With fear in his eyes, he nodded cautiously, no longer daring to show any dissatisfaction. Yu Qinan had no expression on his face and put away his sword. Blood mixed with saliva and broken teeth fell to the ground from the tip of the scabbard. The next moment, a man rushed forward with a clean handkerchief in his hand. Brother, the sword is dirty, let me help you clean it. Yu Qinan hurriedly put the sword back into the storage magic weapon and avoided the hand of the person who came. Xin Yun caught nothing. He stood up slowly with a smile on his face. Brother, please don't be polite to me. Yu Qinan's eyelids twitched. He wrapped the small bag in his arms with his spiritual power and threw it over. Don't give me anything anymore, I don't need it. Xin Yun had no choice but to accept it. This is to prevent things from falling to the ground due to loss of spiritual power to support them. Brother, it's just some food. Yu Qinan took a step back and put some distance between them. The path of spiritual practice emphasizes the absence of desire. Eat less of these things in the future. As for this challenge, it is just my personal behavior and has nothing to do with you. If you don't want me to point my sword at you next time, don't come again. After he finished speaking, Yu Qinan flicked his sleeves and a broadsword appeared under his feet. It carried him up into the air quickly and headed far away. The elder referee also yawned and left. When the two figures disappeared from sight, the excitement was over. The onlookers began to leave one after another. Although they said nothing, their eyes towards Xin Yun were full of mockery. Xin Yun pretended not to see it, put away the food in her arms, and walked over to put away the chair. The show was over and it was time for her to go home. But then a man came over quietly and whispered. I have a question for you. Xin Yun turned around and saw that it was the little fat boy from before. So he answered with a smile. Just ask, little brother. The fat boy moved closer. From the way you looked before, you didn't seem like a brainless person. How could I not see that senior brother you didn't like you? Xin Yun blinked. Instead of answering immediately, he pointed ahead and motioned for him to talk while walking. The little fat boy didn't care about it and walked out with her. Just now, didn't you feel disgusted by senior brother Yu's attitude towards you? How dare you give me a chair, food, and even come up to me to clean my sword? Are you cheap? Xin Yun was listening attentively, but suddenly stopped after hearing the last two times. He looked at the little fat boy next to him speechlessly. Little senior brother, I want to know, have you ever been beaten for talking? The little fat man was silent for a moment and waved his hand. It doesn't matter, we are talking about you now. It looks like he has been beaten. Xin Yun had the answer, looked forward again, and walked slowly. You don't understand. Love has a kind of magic that makes people willingly throw themselves into the flame. I know that senior brother Yu doesn't like me, but how can I accept it if I don't give it a try? Even if the final result is not satisfactory, at least I have experienced it and I have loved. This process is already beautiful enough. The little fat boy moved away unconsciously. He didn't understand, but he was shocked. Is this the moth of love? Isn't this a pure fool? Xin Yun smiled and said nothing more. Giving chairs, giving food, and cleaning swords, are these the key points? No. The key point is that during this process, she sent over the prepared cultivation resources, skills and techniques, and received the system rewards as she wished. The character of the bootlicker is just to have a legitimate reason to approach the male protagonist and give him something. Of course, it is impossible to tell this to others. Xin Yun changed the subject. What's your name, junior brother? My last name is Tang, and my given name is Jing. Hello, senior brother Tang. Xin Yun smiled and clasped her fists, then changed the subject. I wonder if junior brother Tang knows who senior brother Yu is going to challenge tomorrow. Tang Jing was stunned. Are you still planning to come? Can't. Sure, as long as you are not afraid of senior brother Yu's sword, you can do whatever you want. Tang Jing was inexplicably convinced. We should be at Budo Peak tomorrow. Xin Yun wrote down in detail what Tang Jing said, and asked about the time. After getting the same answer as today, she thanked him, said goodbye to Tang Jing, got on the ostrich and left. Along the way, the sect disciples they met still remained quiet and saluted, but Xin Yun was no longer bothered by this. She was thinking about something else. For example, why didn't the news about what happened with the heroine 3 days ago spread? I had thought that this matter would be quickly spread throughout the sect by the person who was secretly targeted, but now it seems that their identities are indeed different. There are rumors flying all over the place about her, but there is no trace of the heroine at all. I just don't know how much effort the male protagonist put into this. Xin Yun was a little envious, but then she stopped thinking about it. No news has been leaked, and there is one less black mark on me that sneaked into senior brother Yu's residence again, which is a good thing. Besides, there is a difference between the challenge and the original plot. Xin Yun thought about it carefully and realized that this change was probably caused by her. According to Tang Jing, Yu Chenan's low-key attitude made it difficult for Ding Yi to find an opportunity to target him. Then it is very likely that, in the original text, Ding Yi did not find an opportunity until the male protagonist got into trouble, and after the male protagonist got into trouble, there was no need to target him anymore. Therefore, the name Ding Yi did not appear in the plot. But now she went to find the male protagonist at the wrong time and was discovered. This gave Ding Yi an entry point to spread those rumors to discuss the male protagonist. As the protagonist of the novel, Yu Chenan naturally couldn't stand it, so he started to visit them one after another. In other words, it was her little butterfly arms that distorted the plot. Xin Yun felt a little heavy-hearted. I think I still have to keep a low profile in the future. If you interfere too much in the plot, you will be in trouble if you can't get out of it when you want to. While I was daydreaming, I had already arrived outside the accommodation area. Xin Yun returned the ostrich, paid the cost of going to Zhongzhou Peak, and hurried back to her residence. Enter the room, take off the jade hairpin on your head, and let Alu return to human form. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and turned on the system. She remembered hearing before that practicing the Xianling Ju technique triggered a critical hit. Chapter 20 My Spiritual Power. Her eye swept across other objects and stopped on a book with the special effect of the word, and Xin Yun couldn't help but smile. Before delivering the gifts, what she most wanted to see was this scene, but she knew in her heart that a critical hit had a small probability and it would not be that easy. But when this scene really appeared, Xin Yun just wanted to say thank you for the gift from the system dad. Without any more hesitation, Xin Yun took out the Xianling Ju after the critical hit. As soon as she mastered the technique, it turned into a ball of pure white light and rushed into her brow. Xin Yun was startled and hurriedly sat cross-legged in meditation, closing her eyes to check the situation. There was only one more technique in my mind, nothing else. Xin Yun breathed a sigh of relief and began to check the information about the martial arts. With just a brief comparison, he discovered the shadow of the original Xianling Ju. It is still the same big framework as before, and the main changes are in the details above the framework. If the previous Xianling Ju was a rough draft, then the one after it was returned will be a fine work of art. As for the effect, you won't find anything just by looking at it backwards. With trust in the system, Xin Yun was not in a hurry. After reading it carefully several times and making sure that he had memorized it all, he began to try to practice. Since it was just an experiment, no pills were used. As the technique was put into practice, spiritual energy from all around gathered together, and the speed was much faster than the previous ordinary practice. Roughly estimated, it was about 2 to 3 times faster. And when these spiritual powers flowed into the body through their 5 hearts and began to adapt to the body under the guidance of the spiritual consciousness, Xin Yun, who was guided to be refined, understood where the tenfold effect returned by the system was added. Refining efficiency. She had encountered this problem before. Too much spiritual energy entered the body and could not be absorbed, so it had to be released. But now it's different. These spiritual powers are quickly refined and, like a good baby, enter the dantian and sink into silence. Even Xin Yun inexplicably felt a physical dissatisfaction with the lack of spiritual power. Xin Yun took out a soul-enriching pill with 10 times the effect and stuffed it into her mouth. Start practicing again. This time, there was finally enough spiritual power. She guided the external spiritual power somewhat awkwardly, moving it along the meridians delineated by the new technique. Walking, walking, walking. Suddenly, the flow of spiritual power stagnated and the leading spiritual power stopped. Xin Yun thought there was something wrong with her guidance, so she made some adjustments and wanted to continue walking with her spiritual power. But, the spiritual power did not move. Xin Yun tried again, but still nothing happened. She was a little unwilling to give up and forced herself to move with her spiritual power. But the leading spiritual power turned around and led the spiritual power behind it to the other side. Xin Yun? What the hell? Is the spiritual power out of control? She quickly began to guide her spiritual power while recalling the contents of the technique. It seems that this is indeed the meridian. The spiritual power is still under his control, waiting to be guided. Xin Yun continued to practice with doubts. After about 20 breaths, the spiritual power stopped on its own. Xin Yun. This time, she didn't move. The leading spiritual power waited for a while, but seeing no guidance from the spiritual consciousness, it shook its head violently and turned into the meridian nearby. With the tail behind him, he staggered onto the road. Xin Yun was shocked. Oh shit! What the hell is this? She frantically searched for the technique in her sea of consciousness and studied it carefully. The path that the spiritual power is taking now is the correct one. She was indeed wrong. No, that is not the point. The point is why it knows which side is the right one and moves on its own. Xin Yun opened her eyes and jumped to the ground, no longer maintaining her sitting position. The internal skills have not stopped running, the spiritual power is still moving. System of systems. Xin Yun shouted nervously. The next moment, a stream of information flooded into my mind. Xianling Ju Critical Strike version, this technique has a flexible nature. When it is mastered, the spiritual power will have a certain degree of autonomy to assist in practice. Autonomy. Are you sure it was the assist, and not me being kicked away, and it ran away on its own? Looking at the spiritual power in her body, the leading spiritual power led the rest to complete a cycle and return to the dantian. Then it commanded all the spiritual power in the dantian to move and purify itself. Then it went out of the dantian again and started to run a cycle with the spiritual power that entered the body later. Xin Yun's eyelids twitched. Has this thing become a spirit? No, wait. Just now, she didn't intervene at all, but she didn't stop practicing, which means. Xin Yun felt it carefully. Cultivation has improved. She sat back on the bed, thought for a moment, then lay down again, staring at the ceiling and clearing her mind. After being stunned for a while, he checked his own situation. The cultivation method is still running, and the cultivation level has improved a lot. Is this the spiritual power having autonomy? This is clearly a cheat code for AFK cultivation, okay? From then on, she no longer had to maintain the same posture, sitting from dusk to dawn, and painstakingly guiding and refining her spiritual energy. She just had to lie down, and her spiritual power would start moving on its own. There is nothing much to say, just one word, refreshing. Xin Yun's mouth curled up. But I felt that there seemed to be waves of resentment coming from the side. She turned to look. Arlu was clinging to the edge of the bed, her face full of grievance and tears falling. Food, no more. Are this? Xin Yun sat up. Sorry, I forgot, wait a moment. She took out some returned spiritual power from the system space and handed it to Alu. This is a spiritual stone, and it also contains spiritual power. But Alu shook her head vigorously. It's different. Yunyan's spiritual power is different from this. Xin Yun was stunned. All the scenes from the time she and Alu met to the present flashed through her mind, and she slowly reacted. There are many disciples in the Xianling sect, and many of them have higher cultivation than her, but Alu only chose her. There is a lot of free spiritual energy between heaven and earth, and she has never seen Alu absorb it. However, Alu had a strong desire for the spiritual power passing through her body, and was willing to accept attacks even if they were converted from spiritual power. Xin Yun hissed softly. She also recalled how she had completely absorbed the medicinal properties of the elixir, and how the fire lizard poison had no effect on her. So, she is special. After confirming this, a possibility popped up in Xin Yun's mind. Special physique. This thing has appeared in the original text, and quite a lot. The male protagonist's holy demon body is a demon cultivation physique that is close to light attribute spiritual power. The female protagonist's heavenly ghost body is a natural ghost cultivation physique. The female protagonist's pure sword bone is a sword cultivation physique with full light sword talent. Xin Yun never thought that she, a small villain and cannon fodder, could receive such treatment. It's just that it wasn't mentioned in the original text. Xin Yun fell into deep thought. The original text does say that special physiques are very hidden, and before they are awakened, it is difficult for either yourself or others to discover them. Only when you begin to awaken will you show your differences and be noticed. And after that, it needs to actively develop itself before it can show its power. Under such circumstances, there were many cases where people went astray because their physical conditions did not awaken in time, or where their special physical conditions were not discovered until after their death. And she in the original text is most likely the latter. Oh no, she should be dead and not found. Chapter 21. I'm in a hurry. Xin Yun felt a little bit of sadness. Then he adjusted his mood and put away the spirit stone in his hand. It's different after all. She traveled through time and space, awakened her special physique, and solved the source of the tragedy in the original text. In the future, with the help of the system and hard practice, you can also create a new world outside of the plot. Although I still don't know what kind of special physique I have, I don't know what will happen if I take back the poison pill and offend the mastermind. But everything is still moving in the right direction. Xin Yun secretly encouraged herself, and then looked at the spiritual power in her body that was still in a state of cultivation. Let's discuss it. Should we save some to feed the little ghost? The leading spiritual power paused, somewhat reluctantly. He swayed and staggered forward for a while before releasing some of his spiritual power. That part of the spiritual power dissipated into the flesh and blood, and then flowed out of the body through the pores of the skin. Alu hurriedly moved forward, her little nose twitching, and she took the spiritual power into her body. Then he narrowed his eyes and rubbed Xin Yun with the top of his head. Thank you, Yun, I love you the most. Xin Yun let her stick to him. After confirming once more that she no longer needed to control the internal cultivation, she closed her eyes and turned to study and organize the other returned items. These are all important things that will affect your future. Time passed quickly during their intensive training, and Xin Yun went out the next afternoon and headed for Wudao Peak. And through inquiries, he arrived at the location of the male protagonist's challenge that day. There are already quite a few people there. They were gathered in twos and threes, whispering about various things that had nothing to do with the challenge. But after noticing Xin Yun's arrival, these people focused their attention and stopped discussing. It can be seen why they came. Xin Yun remained calm and walked to the front of the crowd. But then a familiar little fat man came over. Oh my god, you really dare to come here? Xin Yun smiled. Why not? Senior brother, you won't eat me. As he spoke, he took out a chair from the storage ring and placed it on the ground. The fat boy Tang Jing had a complicated expression. I think if you continue like this, you're really going to get beaten. Xin Yun took out 2 small bags of snacks and handed one over. Want to eat? Tang Jing hesitated to speak. Finally, he reached out to take the small bag, reached into it, grabbed a small cake and stuffed it into his mouth. He spoke vaguely. Stop it, it's hard to persuade the damn devil with kind words, just take the punishment if you want to. Xin Yun pinched out a candied fruit and put it in her mouth, squinting her eyes. That's not necessarily true. Senior brother Yu is a good person. Tang Jing spoke with deep sincerity. Good people can't tolerate bad people. Xin Yun turned around and snatched the small bag from Tang Jing's hand. If you can't speak, don't speak. Tang Jing held out his 2 empty fat hands with an awkward expression. The next second, the sound of swords rang out in the air, and Yu Qinan flew over with the referee elder. Xin Yun immediately perked up. He stuffed 2 open small bags into Tang Jing's hands and walked forward happily. Yu Qinan's gaze fell on her and paused slightly. Then he stopped in the air with a dark face and summoned a silver-white sword with his right hand. With a wave of the sword, the courtyard in front was split in half. The next second, a skinny young man ran out of the yard in a panic. He glanced at the dust on his body, raised his head, and glared. Yu Qinan, you. Without waiting for him to finish, Yu Qinan threw down a pile of spirit stones. This is compensation. Let's start the challenge right away. I'm in a hurry. As soon as he finished speaking, the long sword in his hand swung slightly, and 3 lightsabers appeared, flying towards the skinny young man on the ground. The skinny young man's face flushed. You're too. As soon as the two words were spoken, the sword shadow arrived. The skinny young man did not resist and fell to his knees with a plop. The sword shadow then stopped. It was only a finger's distance away from the skinny young man's face. The skinny young man was sweating profusely and spoke in a panic. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have spread rumors everywhere for a little benefit, causing damage to your reputation, senior brother Yu. I admit my mistake. I'm sorry. This sudden change stunned everyone present. Then there was a faint burst of booing. In the cultivation world, strength is respected, and practitioners admire the strong. Such behavior of being cowardly before fighting is naturally looked down upon. Yu Qinan didn't expect this either. But he was only surprised for a moment, then slowly retracted the sword that was emitting a cold light. He gave two options, both of which were offered, and this person chose the second one and simply did it. Then he wouldn't have insisted on fighting a whole match. It's not enough to just say you're wrong, you'd better really think so in your heart. If not. Yu Qinan did not finish his words, leaving a blank. But this made those who heard it tremble with fear even more. I understand. Brother Yu, please rest assured that I will never speak nonsense or spread rumors again. I will definitely correct my mistakes. Yu Qinan did not respond to this. He turned around with his flying sword and quickly left. When the skinny young man saw him leave, he sat down on the ground and wiped the sweat off his face with his hand. He murmured subconsciously. Didn't I give you time the last few times? What's going on? This performance caused boos from the audience. Xin Yun was silent. After Tang Jing came up, he took the open bag of candied fruit, picked up one and put it in his mouth. Senior brother Yu has a lot of things to do every day, so it's only natural for him to be busy. No, he didn't land because he saw you. How could that be? I'm not some ancient monster. Yes, senior brother Yu just chose to hurry up and solve the problem so as to stay away from you. Young senior brother Tang, have you ever been beaten? After exchanging a few friendly words with Tang Jing and asking about the location of tomorrow's challenge, Xin Yun packed up her things and returned to her residence in a happy mood. Immerse yourself in practice again. So, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. Xin Yun would go to the scene every time and set up chairs for rest every time. But every time, Yu Qinan stood in the air, took care of the enemy in a few moves, and then left in a hurry. From beginning to end, it never fell to the ground. Xin Yun was helpless about this. Isn't this bullying her because her cultivation is not enough and she can't control the spiritual weapon to fly? But after waiting many times, she got used to it. As long as Yu Qinan didn't land, she wouldn't go to him. You can sit on the chair you bring out, use the parasol yourself, eat the snacks yourself and be a quiet spectator. This kind of day lasted for more than 10 days, and Yu Qinan's challenge to the person who spread the rumors had reached the final step. The son of the master of alchemy Peak, Ding Yi. This time, many disciples came to watch the battle. The arena was also specially set up in a small martial arts training ground on the alchemy peak. As always, Xin Yun ran to the front before the challenge began, put the chair in place, and waited patiently for the male lead to appear. Only. Chapter 22. Is it time for dinner? Xin Yun waited for a long time. Until the challenge time was over, until the challenge Ding Yi slowly walked onto the stage, until the audience began to get restless, there was still no sign of Yu Qinan. Did something happen that delayed you? Xin Yun couldn't help but feel a little anxious. In particular, since Ding Yi arrived, he has maintained a leisurely attitude, sitting beside the ring and chatting with a young girl. It seemed that he didn't care at all whether Yu Qinan would come or when he would come. Xin Yun tried to keep calm. Tell yourself that Yu Qinan is the male lead, the protagonist, the son of destiny, and nothing will happen to him. Even if there is, we will definitely turn danger into safety and turn defeat into victory. I don't know why, the more I think about it, the more confused I become. Time continued to pass, and after another quarter of an hour, there was a sudden uproar among the crowd. Xin Yun hurried over to look. Yu Qinan walked slowly towards them, his clothes were torn, and blood was dripping from his right arm holding the sword. He looked calm, as if he felt no pain. But his face was pale, his steps were unsteady, and it was obvious that something was wrong. Xin Yun used her spiritual power, rushed to Yu Qinan in a few steps, and raised her hand to support him. Brother, what's wrong with you? Yu Qinan said nothing. But this time, he did not resist Xin Yun's contact. Instead, he evenly distributed some of his strength and stabilized his body with the help of Xin Yun. After discovering this, Xin Yun's heart couldn't help but sink. Yu Chenan's dislike for her was real. If his condition was not extremely bad and he was not completely exhausted, how could he do this? It was at this time that Ding Yi's surprised voice was heard. "Huh? You can still make it." In an instant, Xin Yun understood everything. Today's competition venue is not like the previous ones, which are chosen near those people's residences. Therefore, the elder judge did not follow Yu Chenan, but came directly to Liandan Peak from the court. In other words, Yu Chenan is traveling alone today. Under such circumstances, Ding Yi could easily send someone to secretly intercept Yu Chenan on the road, thus securing his victory before the challenge began. That's why he is so calm. That's why Yu Chenan appeared in this state at this time. How despicable. Xin Yun gritted her teeth secretly. But Ding Yi stood up, stretched his body, and looked at Yu Chenan with a smile. "Since you are here, come up. Junior brother Yu has the leisure to challenge a fellow disciple over a trivial matter. Then I, your senior brother, will certainly satisfy you. I'll also teach you how to recognize yourself." Yu Chenan's eyes were cold. That's no small matter. Having said that, he took a step forward, intending to go straight onto the stage. Xin Yun hurriedly grabbed him. "Are you crazy to fight in this state? It is true that Yu Chenan is very talented, but he entered the Dao too late, and now he has only just entered the foundation building stage." However, Ding Yi on the arena had been practicing since he was a child. He had entered the foundation building stage a few years earlier than him, and now, he was close to the golden elixir stage. This is a battle between people of different strength levels. Xin Yun had confidence in Yu Chenan before because he was the male protagonist, and for the male protagonist, fighting across levels is a routine operation. But this does not include fighting an enemy in his prime while being unable to even stand steadily. Yu Chenan felt the strength coming from his arm, took a deep breath, and looked at Xin Yun beside him. "I'm fine. I can handle it." "I don't believe you." Xin Yun held him tightly and refused to let go. A hint of helplessness flashed across Yu Chenan's eyes. While he was still trying to persuade him, he heard Ding Yi's voice again on the stage. "I say, junior brother Yu, are you still able to do it? Can't you just go back with your mistress? Stay in bed. Why are you embarrassing yourself by coming out? Still challenging? Har har, what a joke." Yu Chenan subconsciously tightened his sword-holding hand and mobilized his spiritual power. Unexpectedly, the next moment, a hand pressed on his hand. Yu Chenan looked up. Xin Yun looked at him seriously and asked, "Brother Yu, isn't it time for dinner?" "Yu Chenan?" There was a sudden silence all around. Even Ding Yi on the stage was stunned for a moment before he asked, "Yu Chenan, how did you fall for this idiot? Was it just his face?" Xin Yun ignored him. With a flip of his hand, a set of 8 immortals tables and chairs appeared on the spot. And coincidentally, the table was in front of Yu Chenan and the chair was behind him. Xin Yun pushed hard, and Yu Chenan sat down like he did that day, a little confused. "Come, brother, this is roasted chicken, this is steamed goose and duck chops, and this is carp sashimi." The same scene appeared before his eyes again after some time, and Yu Chenan suddenly didn't know what emotion he should feel. After a moment's silence, he looked up at Xin Yun, who was arranging the dishes one by one, and was about to speak. However, this time Xin Yun still did not give him a chance to speak. She took out her chopsticks, picked up a piece of meat, and while he opened his mouth, she quickly stuffed it in. "Challenging the ring or something is just a trivial matter for you, there is no need for you to miss your meal because of it." She looked at Yu Chenan with a smile, her eyes full of affection. Yu Chenan took a look and then looked away. But then, he felt something was wrong. The piece of meat that was fed into the mouth was wrapped in something. When that thing came into contact with the saliva, it quickly turned into a warm current and flowed into his body. Then, his meridians, which were aching from excessive use of spiritual power, were quickly soothed. Pill? What kind of elixir could have such a terrifying effect? Yu Chenan glanced at the smiling Xin Yun and began to chew slowly. When Xin Yun saw this, she hurriedly took out a pair of chopsticks and handed them forward. Yu Chenan hesitated for a moment and took it with his left hand. Everyone who saw this scene was stunned. It would be fine if Xin Yun acted foolishly in such an occasion, but why did senior brother Yu follow her in doing so? Ding Yi's face turned black. Fighting in the ring is a serious matter. These two people were eating leisurely in the audience, as if their opponent didn't exist. He strode down the ring, but the next moment, his thoughts turned and he figured something out. Little girl, you don't think that by using dinner as an excuse to buy him some time, he can beat me? Xin Yun slowly turned her head, glanced at him, and showed a look of realization. Oh, sorry, I forgot about you. As the saying goes, only when you are full can you have the strength to fight. Do you want to eat something too? But I don't have any extra food. I only have the bird food I bought for the sect's ostrich mount. Would you like to make do with it? As he spoke, some bird food mixed with dead insects was scattered towards where Ding Yi was. Spreading the seeds widely is the correct way to feed birds. Ding Yi waved his long sleeves and used his spiritual power to block the bird food, his face as black as ink. You're looking for death. The golden sword was unsheathed, carrying with it terrifying sword power, and pounced towards Xin Yun. Chapter 23 Left-hand Sword. Xin Yun's expression changed slightly. Just as he was about to retreat, he heard the sound of a sword, and the long sword in Yu Chenan's right hand flew out and met the golden sword that was coming towards him. Clang! The sound of golden swords clashing rang out, and the terrifying sword energy spread in all directions, and a strong wind raged. On Xin Yun's side, a layer of pearly white spiritual power shield rose quietly, covering an area including the 8 immortals' tables and chairs, blocking the aftermath of the sword energy and the scattered dust. Xin Yun blinked and looked at the only person sitting on the field. Yu Chenan calmly took the chopsticks, picked up a piece of fish and put it into his mouth. His expression is calm and his posture is relaxed. On the way here, I encountered some blind creatures, so I had to move around a bit. I am indeed a little hungry. Brother Ding, you don't mind waiting for me to eat, right? Ding Yi's expression changed. The attack just now was launched with anger. Even though it was not fully powerful, it was still about 70% to 80%. Why was Yu Chenan able to block it so easily? Could it be that his condition was not as bad as it appeared? Was he not injured? Ding Yi was a little flustered. At this time, a man hurried over, came close to Ding Yi, and said something through voice transmission. Ding Yi's gaze moved and fell on Yu Chenan's right arm that was hanging under the table and dripping with blood. His expression relaxed and became confident. He retracted his sword, his face full of pride. You are at the end of your strength. I will give you time to recover. What is there to be afraid of? Yu Chenan did not respond to this. He continued to eat the dishes on the table calmly, and the speed at which he picked up food did not change. And Xin Yun sat on the chair with a smile on her face. Brother, how does it taste? Is it delicious? This kind of indifferent attitude made Ding Yi's face, which had just recovered a little, darken again. But the words have been spoken, and there is no reason to regret it on the spot. Ding Yi snorted coldly and turned back to the ring. On this side, Yu Chenan heard Xin Yun's question and stopped what he was doing. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and his tone softened. Let's use it together. Yeah, okay. Although she answered like this, Xin Yun did not start eating. Instead, she supported her chin with her hand and looked at Yu Chenan with burning eyes. Yu Chenan looked back. What are you looking at? Aren't you hungry? Xin Yun shook her head. Look at my brother, he is so pretty, he is a feast for the eyes. Don't use the wrong words. But I think it's appropriate. The crowd watching suddenly felt an inexplicable discomfort, mixed with a bit of disgust. So they all shifted their attention and waited patiently for the next competition. In this way, about a quarter of an hour passed. Yu Chenan put down his chopsticks. His face was still pale, his breath was weak, and his right hand hung motionless. But Xin Yun could feel the anger suppressed deep inside. She pulled out a handkerchief and handed it over. Have you finished eating? Yu Chenan took the handkerchief subconsciously, as if it was a habitual action. Then he reacted, was stunned for a moment, slowly wiped the oil stains from the corners of his mouth, and stood up. I went. Good. Xin Yun stood up and watched Yu Chenan pull out a chair and walk towards the stage step by step. Ding Yi had finally waited for this moment, with a sword in his hand, his aura rising. A cruel smile appeared on his face. Swords have no eyes, and fighting is an uncontrollable and dangerous thing. So, it is reasonable that he did not stop and caused some bad consequences, right? He watched Yu Chenan slowly walk onto the stage and stand opposite him. With his left hand, he tightly grasped the silver-white sword. Ding Yi couldn't help laughing out loud. Junior brother Yu, when did you start practicing left-handed sword? Is it easy to use? Do you want me, your senior brother, to let you give way? Yu Qinan ignored him, turned his head calmly, looked at the referee elder, and waited for his order. The referee elder was a little hesitant. After thinking about it, I reminded him. You initiated the challenge. If you don't want to fight, you can cancel it at any time. Thank you, but no thanks. Yu Qinan first thanked him and then gave a positive answer. Seeing him like this, the referee didn't know what to say. He nodded and took a few steps back. Then the battle begins. As soon as the referee finished speaking, Ding Yi couldn't wait to swing forward with a golden sword energy. A dark golden color appeared on his legs, and he took a step forward. Yu Qinan held the sword in his left hand and mobilized his spiritual power to meet the golden sword energy. After a stalemate with it for a moment, he cut it in half. At this time, Ding Yi was already approaching. The long sword slashed down from the upper left. Yu Qinan raised his sword to respond. However, his movements were stiff and his strength was obviously insufficient, and he was defeated almost instantly. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It was obvious that Yu Qinan was not in good condition, and anyone could see it. Many people also guessed something from Ding Yi's performance. Therefore, they had already given up hope on Yu Qinan, thinking that he had already failed in this challenge before he even took the stage. Now seeing him fighting the enemy with an obviously unfamiliar left-handed sword and being suppressed the moment they fought, it only confirmed his own thoughts. Ding Yi sneered even more and increased the strength in his hands. Junior brother Yu, why is your left-hand sword so soft, like a girl's? Yu Qinan used his skills to remove the force from the sword and stepped back to avoid continuing to fight. Ding Yi refused to give in and followed him. The golden sword in his hand was sharp as he swung it forward at various angles. Yu Qinan had to pick up his sword to deal with it. This kind of pure confrontation did not contain any traces of magic, it was entirely a fight of cultivation and strength. But everyone could see that Yu Qinan's response was very reluctant. He couldn't take on the force from Ding Yi's sword, and most of the time, he used skills to relieve the force. If this goes on, sooner or later there will be a time when it cannot be removed. Even the referee elder couldn't help but shook his head. The rhythm of this battle was completely controlled by Ding Yi, and it turned into a game of cat and mouse with a clear outcome. It was also at this time that Yu Qinan retreated to the edge of the ring and had nowhere to retreat. Ding Yi smiled teasingly. No longer teasing with sword moves, his whole body of spiritual energy burst out, and a snake-like shadow appeared above the golden sword and stabbed straight forward. But I heard Yu Qinan murmur softly. Almost there. What? Ding Yi was puzzled, but his hands did not slow down at all. The tip of the golden sword was close to Yu Qinan's left shoulder in an instant. He had no intention of ending the fight. Instead, he wanted to continue, doing harm in the name of fighting. For example, first destroy Yu Qinan's remaining arm. Ding Yi has a good idea and seems to have seen his own success. But suddenly, a terrifying sword force rose from Yu Qinan's body. There was light in his eyes and in his body. The whole person seemed to have turned into a sharp lightsaber, causing the air around him to buzz. The golden sword, carrying the snake shadow, stopped an inch away from Yu Qinan's left shoulder and could no longer get any closer. Then, cracks appeared on the snake shadow, and as it raised its head and screamed, it shattered with a loud bang. This sword move was actually crushed by the pure sword force. Chapter 24: The Clash of Swords. There was silence at the scene, and everyone looked at Yu Qinan in disbelief, feeling a little confused. What's going on? Didn't he show signs of defeat the moment before? How come he was able to resolve Ding Yi's sure hit attack so easily the next moment? This reversal came too suddenly, didn't it? While they were stunned, Ding Yi reacted first. He dodged and stepped back with an extremely grim look on his face. Are you faking an injury? Although it was a question, he had already determined the answer in his heart. The hand holding the golden sword tightened and his whole body tensed. He was afraid of the unharmed Yu Qinan. Yu Qinan did not explain his injury, but made a few swings with the sword in his left hand. 3 golden sword shadows emerged, surrounding the silver-white sword body and rotating at a constant speed. He stepped forward, his step slow and steady. The long sword danced again, and the three golden sword shadows expanded out of nowhere and turned into three 5-meter-long giant swords, floating around him. Following Yu Chenan's order, they took turns rushing towards Ding Yi's position. Ding Yi couldn't help but show fear on his face. The golden sword in his hand fell out of his hand and floated in front of him with the tip of the sword pointing downward, and his spiritual power was stimulated. Immediately, a heavy golden sword monument condensed around his body, wrapping Ding Yi in it in a protective posture. Just as he finished doing all this, the first giant sword shadow arrived. When the giant sword collided with the sword monument, a terrifying sound wave swept across the entire place. In front of the shocked gazes of everyone present, the shadow of the giant sword shattered and disappeared, while cracks appeared on the sword monument. Then, the second giant sword shadow. Boom! Half of the sword monument turned into rubble and scattered in the wind. The third one. Boom! The sword monument was completely shattered and lost its protective function, but the shadow of the giant sword had not yet disappeared. Under Yu Chenan's control, it shot out and hit Ding Yi, who had no time to defend himself. Ding Yi flew backwards, blood spurted out of his mouth, and his momentum quickly weakened. But he didn't dare stop. He forced himself to adjust his posture and thrust his sword into the ground to slow his retreat. As soon as he stood firm, he drew out his golden sword and summoned a giant snake shadow while waving it. The snake shadow hovered around Ding Yi, opened its mouth and hissed, echoing with the sound of the golden sword in Ding Yi's hand, forming a seamless whole. Following Ding Yi's loud shout, "Go!" the golden sword flew out of his hand, and the shadow of a giant snake followed, carrying with it the sharp metal sword energy, destroying everything in its path and moving forward. Yu Chenan walked at a steady pace. He raised the sword in his left hand and pointed it forward. The next moment, the long sword split into two into four, and then four into thousands of lightsabers of the same shape at an extremely fast speed. Yu Chenan twirled the sword in his hand. The countless lightsabers were like arrows shot from a bow, leaving trails of light in the air and pouncing towards the shadow of the giant snake. Then, where the giant snake's shadow came into contact, it suddenly exploded. Not a stab, but an explosion. This made Ding Yi unable to react quickly, and the giant snake's shadow trembled continuously. But then, he made a gesture and cast a spell, causing a golden halo to appear around the golden sword and around the giant snake's body, which was a thick defensive light shield. The explosions of the lightsaber were isolated, and the golden snake continued to move forward with its snake shadow. Ding Yi couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Look at Yu Chenan again. His steps were still steady. He ignored the giant snake that was charging towards him and didn't care at all. Ding Yi frowned. Did he overlook something? What else did Yu Chenan have to do after this move? His spiritual sense swept across the entire place, and finally, it stopped at the countless spots of light that gathered after the explosion and did not disperse. Ding Yi's pupils shrank slightly, and he hurriedly sent his spiritual power into the golden sword, trying to expand the protective halo. But it was too late. Those light spots attached to the light shield, and the spiritual power surged, triggering a second round of small explosions. The power of each explosion of light spots is not strong, but there are too many of them. When countless light spots exploded at the same time, the light shield only lasted for a short moment before shattering. The remaining lightsabers, wrapped in light spots, accelerated and hit the giant snake's shadow, and then they could no longer be seen clearly. On the stage, there was only the dazzling light and the endless sound of explosions. The audience was shocked. But someone exclaimed, as if he had discovered some truth. I understand. Senior Brother Yu's initial retreat was not because he couldn't win, but because he was using the simplest moves to familiarize himself with using the sword with his left hand. Martial arts techniques are not only about the moves, but also about the circulation of spiritual energy in the body. Senior Brother Yu is good at using the sword in his right hand, and his spiritual energy also tends to flow to the right. If he wants to wield the sword with his left hand, he needs to adjust the direction of his spiritual power and form a new habit. After hearing these words, everyone suddenly understood. But then, there was a moment of silence. How can a habit be changed so easily? They thought they couldn't do it, but Yu Chenan did it so easily. Back on stage. After realizing it was too late, Ding Yi gritted his teeth and continued to send spiritual power into the golden sword through the air, trying to recall it. A sword cultivator's skills all depend on the sword. If he loses the sword, he has lost. If he still wants to have a chance of winning, he must get the golden sword back. Yes. The spiritual power was sent over, but it was like a drop in the ocean, disappearing in an instant, and the golden sword showed no sign of returning either. Gradually, Ding Yi lost most of his spiritual power and his condition began to decline. His face turned pale and he gave up recalling the golden sword. He summoned another sword from his storage magic weapon and held it tightly, using it for the time being. Habits die hard, and the difference in power between a regular sword and a makeshift sword is enormous. But since the golden sword didn't come back, he had no more choices. Under Ding Yi's vigilant gaze, the light faded a little. He finally saw clearly. His golden sword was pinned to the ground by several lightsabers, trembling in vain. After a glance, Ding Yi shifted his gaze and looked at the person who was slowly walking out of the light. Yu Qinan looked at him and spoke calmly. Apologize. Ding Yi was stunned for a moment, then burst into laughter. Apologize? Har har har, who the hell do you think you are to ask me to apologize? You are just a peasant, but you are lucky, blessed by God, and have a little talent, so you think you are extraordinary. You can't even listen to a few idle words, and you're making a fuss out of it. I advise you to get back into the mire as soon as possible, so as not to pollute the peace of the cultivation world. He cursed very loudly, and his curses were mixed with sarcastic laughter, which was very provocative. Yu Qinan was no longer polite. His figure flashed and appeared in the air in front of Ding Yi, and he swung the sword down with his left hand. The heavy sword fell like a mountain. But the next moment, a faint green light appeared on Ding Yi's body, and in an instant two shields condensed, one in front and one behind to protect Ding Yi. Yu Qinan's sword was blocked. However, Ding Yi seized this opportunity and sent the last of his spiritual power into the sword in his hand. With a sword, he stabbed straight at the bottom of Yu Qinan's right shoulder. Yu Qinan has not been using his right hand, which means he is indeed injured. And according to the report from the previous visitor, Yu Qinan's injury is here. Chapter 25. Your heart is not sincere. Although Ding Yi's talent is not as good as Yu Qinan's, he is also known as a genius within the sect. He knows how to control the battle and how to act to tilt the balance of the battle in his favor. For example, using words to provoke people to charge, using trump cards to take on attacks, and killing the enemy with one strike before they have time to change their tactics. Ding Yi was full of confidence in this sword. Unexpectedly, Yu Qinan raised his right hand, put his index finger and middle finger together, and the sword energy on them surged and came forward to meet the attack. Clang! The sound of weapons resounded. Ding Yi only felt a stream of burning sword energy rushing into his palm along the sword. His arm trembled, and the sword slipped out of his hand, falling to the ground with a crisp sound. Ding Yi was a little dazed. He looked down at his shaking hands and his voice was dry. How come? It is obvious that his cultivation is stronger, almost one realm higher than Yu Qinan. It was obvious that he was prepared and sent people to intercept. The messenger clearly said that Yu Qinan was stabbed in the right shoulder and his right hand was basically disabled. How could he lose so easily? Ding Yi raised his eyes and glared at Yu Qinan, his eyes already bloodshot. You don't think you've won, do you? A peasant is a peasant. You don't understand that the battle between cultivators is not just about themselves. As he shouted, he took out the pill and stuffed it into his mouth. At the same time, the two shields protecting him glowed and became more solid. Magic pills and magic weapons are auxiliary methods and also another kind of strength besides one's own. However, challenging the arena does not prohibit these. Ding Yi swallowed the pill and chuckled. My spiritual weapon is a 4th level spiritual weapon that can withstand the attacks of the golden core stage. You can't break this shield, and you can't defeat me. I won't lose, I won't. Ding Yi raised the volume and shouted loudly. But there was an uncontrollable tremor in their voice. From the very beginning, his confidence came from the fact that Yu Qinan was injured, Yu Qinan was in poor condition, and Yu Qinan's right hand was disabled. But when all these premises were overturned, his confidence was completely lost. Looking at his opponent's miserable appearance, Yu Qinan couldn't help but feel a little bored. It is this kind of people who spread rumors secretly and caused. Yu Qinan lowered his eyes. The wind blew, his clothes fluttered, and all the scattered lightsaber spots on the field gathered together and merged into the silver-white sword in his hand. He raised his hand and slashed with the sword. It seemed as if the power of heaven and earth was pressing down with this sword. The shield in front of Ding Yi trembled in vain, and after a few breaths, it shattered directly. Then, the heavy sword force suddenly dispersed and turned into countless tiny sharp blades, impacting Ding Yi. In an instant, the skin and flesh were torn apart and blood splattered everywhere. Ding Yi couldn't help but let out a cry of pain from his throat. Even the pill that had just entered his mouth was spat out along with the blood before he could swallow it. By the time the sword force dissipated, Ding Yi had turned into a bloody man, his clothes torn, barely standing where he was. Yu Qinan pressed the sword in his hand flat on Ding Yi's shoulder and applied a little force. Ding Yi's legs went weak and he knelt on the ground. His knee hit the ground and he felt a pain. Ding Yi came back to his senses and realized what had happened. His lips opened and closed, as if he was about to say something. That is a spiritual weapon that can withstand the attacks of Jindan stage cultivators. How could this person break it so easily? Ding Yi couldn't figure it out. Yu Qinan didn't give him time to think, and spoke again, repeating the two words. Apologize. Ding Yi gritted his teeth, a mocking look on his face. Just as he was about to say something obscene, he felt the sharp blade sweeping across and cutting into the skin on his neck. Ding Yi's eyelids twitched, but he tried to remain calm. You don't. Yu Qinan clenched his right fist and punched him in the face. Bang! Ding Yi's nose was fractured and blood spurted out. Yu Qinan put away his sword and spoke calmly. I can't kill anyone. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw another punch, knocking Ding Yi off his knees and causing him to fall backwards to the ground. He struggled, trying to escape from here. But he felt a hand grabbing his shoulder and pulling him back to where he was. The punch fell again. Yu Qinan stopped talking and asking questions. He just waved his fists as if he was venting his anger. Ding Yi had no way to resist. He held on, and mobilized the spiritual power that he had restored with the elixir. However, before he could use his strength, a heavy punch landed on his lower abdomen. The burning spiritual power penetrated the skin and entered the dantian, dispersing the spiritual power that had been gathered with great difficulty. Indescribable pain quickly spread from the inside out. Ding Yi broke out in a cold sweat and his vision went dark. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and spoke. I apologize. I'm sorry. Yu Qinan stopped his fist. Not to me. Bang! Another punch hit Ding Yi on the side of the face. Ding Yi fell to the ground, spitting blood. It took him a few breaths to realize what Yu Qinan said. He turned his head with difficulty, and his eyes fell on a person below the stage. At the same time, the attention of the audience also shifted over. Xin Yun, who was standing with her arms crossed while watching the male lead beat someone up, was having a great time herself. What's going on? I'm sorry, it was me who made a mistake. Ding Yi stared at her and said through gritted teeth. The next moment, a fist hit him hard on the head. Your heart is not sincere. Ding Yi's blood-stained face twitched, and he felt angry and depressed. But he didn't dare to refute and spoke again. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked someone to spread gossip and tarnish your reputation. Bang! Still not sincere. Ding Yi looked at the dark shadows in his sight, took a deep breath, and then adjusted his tone. Junior Sister Xin, I'm sorry. My actions have caused you trouble, and I am willing to make compensation. This time, Yu Qinan finally did not take action. Ding Yi secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He used his spiritual sense to open the storage magic device and took out a small grey bag. There are 100 middle-grade spirit stones in here. Please forgive me, Junior Sister Xin. Xin Yun's eyes suddenly brightened. The 3 grades of spirit stones, upper, middle and lower, are converted at a ratio of 1 to 100 to 10,000. 100 middle-grade spirit stones, which is equivalent to 10,000 low-grade spirit stones. Is there such a good thing that can happen when you come to watch a challenge? However, this was indeed typed by Yu Qinan. Xin Yun shifted her gaze from the small grey bag with some effort and looked at Yu Qinan. But she met his gaze. After a moment, Yu Qinan shifted his gaze first. He bent down to pick up the small grey bag, stepped down from the stage, walked up to Xin Yun and handed it to her. Thank you for the dinner. Xin Yun blinked and suddenly understood. Brother, do you mean that the apology just now and these spirit stones are considered as payment for dinner? Yu Qinan nodded. Xin Yun immediately refused to agree. Brother, there is no need to make such a clear distinction between you and me. Need. Yu Qinan interrupted her and stuffed the grey bag into her hand. He took 2 steps back and created some distance. Chapter 26 Promise. Xin Yun looked at Yu Qinan who was 2 steps away, and her expression control almost collapsed. Am I a monster? Are you so eager to pay me and get rid of me? We were sitting at the same table not long ago. I took so much trouble to help you, and you just want to get rid of me with a little money? Where is your conscience? What hook did you feed it to? Wait. She is the bootlicker and Yu Chenan is the pursuer. Logically speaking, if Yu Chenan had no intention of developing a relationship with her, it seemed right to stay away from her and not give her a chance. So, she was actually wrong. Xin Yun fell into deep thought. But then Yu Chenan spoke with a serious tone. From now on, if you encounter any injustice, you can come to me. As long as you are right, I will help you. Xin Yun was stunned. The next moment, Yu Chenan changed the subject. But other than that, don't come looking for me. And don't think about any emotional matters anymore. I've said it many times, there's no chance between you and me. Xin Yun turned the corner. Yu Chenan really had no intention, and his previous actions were mainly to stay away from her. For example, after seeing her, just stop in the air to complete the challenge and resolve the battle. But today, Dingyi's blockade made it difficult for him to even fly with the sword. Then she approached him and took the opportunity to press him on the dining table. Yu Chenan discovered the pills she had hidden in the food and accepted the help. And then the reward was given, Dingyi's apology and compensation. He will still insist on staying away from her because of emotional matters, but he will not forget her kindness today, so he made a promise. In other words, I will repay your kindness, but don't think of using kindness to seek love, that's impossible. There are not many male protagonists in the world who can clearly separate gratitude and love. Xin Yun was filled with emotion. Yu Chenan watched her expression gradually change from confusion to joy, and couldn't help but frowning. Do you understand? Understood. Xin Yun nodded hurriedly. Then move forward. Brother, I don't have any use for the middle-grade spirit stone for now, so I'll give it to you. As she approached, Yu Chenan stepped back, keeping his distance while hearing her words clearly. His face turned dark and he was speechless. It's a waste of words. He snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, stepped on the flying sword, and flew directly into the air, flying away. He suddenly stopped again and stepped back. My promise still stands. Then he turned into a stream of light and quickly left here. Xin Yun held the small grey bag in her hand that she couldn't give away, feeling a little regretful. However, I haven't fully mastered the things I got in exchange before, and I'm not in a hurry to continue sending them in exchange for system rewards. I'll wait until next time. She tilted her head back, looking in the direction where the light disappeared, the corners of her lips rising unconsciously. The more I get to know this person, the more I feel that the original owner's love for him is not without reason. Don't look at it, it has already flown far away. A faint voice came from the side, and Xin Yun came back to her senses and looked over. Tang Jing had a strange look on his face. He looked her up and down, his lips moving as if he wanted to say something but stopped. Xin Yun was in a good mood at the moment, so she spoke generously. Just say whatever you want to say. You actually used a meal to get the protection of senior brother Yu. You stepped on dog shit when you went out, didn't you? She was wrong, she shouldn't have given this thing a chance to speak. The challenge was over, and Xin Yun returned to her residence in a happy mood. But before seeing the courtyard, a waiting figure appeared, and the happy state disappeared. When the man saw Xin Yun coming back, he smiled and came forward to greet her. Xiao Yun, you are finally back. Come here, I have something very important to tell you. Li Qing put her arm around her shoulders in a familiar manner, and while talking, she pushed Xin Yun into the yard. Xin Yun thought for a moment and chose not to push her arm away. He just stopped and asked curiously. What's the important thing? Li Qing's eyes darkened when she saw that she couldn't enter the courtyard. But he still kept smiling. In a few days, our 1-year initiation period will be completed. Do we need to take on missions? I just happened to know a senior brother who agreed to take me on a mission, and then I thought of you. How about it, do you want to come with me? No good intentions, definitely a trap. This sentence appeared in Xin Yun's mind, but she was not panicked. Asked again. Which brother? What mission? My senior brother's last name is Wu. You don't know him. I will introduce him to you on the day of the mission. As for the mission, it has not been confirmed yet. You need to wait until the time comes to accept it, but I can guarantee that it will not be a difficult mission. It's probably something like collection. It's very easy to do. Li Qing said this and moved closer. If it was in the past, I wouldn't have called you. After all, you have a job at the weapon refining peak, and you can choose a similar task to do. But now you have offended the people at refining peak, haven't you? Having said that, Li Qing paused. He patted Xin Yun's shoulder before continuing. I won't talk about your sad story anymore, let's talk about the mission. It's a good thing to have an experienced senior brother leading you on a mission. It means I'm good to you and thinking about you. Even if you want to find someone to take you there, you may not be able to find one. Okay, that's great. In order to lead me into the trap, he even let go of the past grudges and came to make me laugh. Isn't that great? Xin Yun nodded and said seriously. Thanks. Li Qing smiled immediately. No need to thank me, what is our relationship? As long as you agree, I will go talk to senior brother Wu and ask the team to take you with them. But you don't have to worry about that. You just need to wait and follow the team when the time comes. Xin Yun nodded again. Okay, I understand. Li Qing smiled, took her hand away from her shoulder, waved at her, and walked towards the courtyard next to her. It's settled then. I'll come find you when I have news. Aha! The two of them parted ways and walked into the courtyard. Li Qing's smile instantly turned into a sneer, but Xin Yun was very calm. This team mission is a trap, and Li Qing has a plan. Xin Yun was very sure of this. But while Li Qing had good intentions, she also wanted to resolve the matter as soon as possible and solve the problem left over from Li Qing's demonic blood toxin. So going is inevitable. Xin Yun opened the courtyard formation and walked into their house. Next, we must seize the time to improve our strength. But at this moment, a sense of consciousness came from the dark green jade hairpin on her head. Yun, yes, someone is there. Xin Yun was shocked. Then he forced himself to calm down and continued walking inside as if nothing had happened. Of course she believed what Alu said. But the purpose of the visitor is unclear, so it is better not to alert him and wait and see what he wants to do first. Chapter 27. This posture is good. Xin Yun pretended to be relaxed, walked to the table, pulled out a chair and sat down. At the same time, he mobilized his spiritual power and was on guard in secret. To ensure that you can always be in the best condition. Unexpectedly, the next moment, a smiling voice sounded, with a sense of complete relief. Yes, after noticing someone breaking in, you still kept quiet and confused the enemy. Soon, a beautiful woman appeared in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed with her legs crossed, her chin slightly raised, and a haughty look on her face. Her eyes are long and upturned at the ends. Now that she is smiling, she looks even more charming. Looking down, she saw the exquisite curves and the proud look. Xin Yun subconsciously lowered her eyes to look at herself. TSK. She stood up from her chair and raised her hand to gather the flames. He looked with hostility at the beautiful woman who was sitting on his bed without any courtesy. The smile on the beautiful woman's lips froze for a moment before she continued. My name is Yang Qi, the current leader of the weapon refining peak. You don't have to be hostile to me. Xin Yun had no expression on her face. No, that's not the question. Yang Qi somehow understood what she meant. She took a deep breath and switched her legs and folded them up again. More than half a month ago, I accidentally found a processed low-level spiritual material, a piece of cold iron. The material is very common, but the impurities in it are very few. It doesn't look like the material processed by a cultivator in the Qi training stage. But the low-level spiritual materials in the sect are all handled by the outer disciples, and there is no foundation building stage in the outer sect. Having said this, she stopped and stared at Xin Yun with narrowed eyes. Xin Yun is silent. What does it mean that spiritual material is related to her? No, to the original owner. I was curious, so I picked it up and took a closer look. Yang Qi spoke again. I discovered that there is some special spiritual energy remaining in that piece of cold iron, mixed with purification properties. That night, I went to the spiritual materials hall and asked the elders who was the outer disciple who handled this piece of cold iron. Yang Qi stopped again. Xin Yun also understood what she meant. The original owner had indeed handled some cold iron a few days before she traveled through time, which completely matched the description of this beautiful woman. As for the purifying properties of spiritual power, this is the first time she has heard of it. But you can understand it if you think about it. Now, she also has a special physique. It is normal for a special physique to have special spiritual power. Isn't it because of her special spiritual power that Arlu can catch up? It was only now that I realized that the special feature of her spiritual power was purification. And also, before she traveled through time, the original owner's spiritual power already had special characteristics. Does that mean that the awakening of her special physique was not awakening because of the time travel, as she had thought before, but that it had already begun to awaken? Then why was it not mentioned in the original text? The possibility that had been linked before was overturned. Xin Yun frowned, very puzzled. Yang Qi didn't know what she was thinking. He waited for a while, but seeing no other reaction from her, he had to continue talking. Spiritual energy has the power of purification, which means you have some special physique. It is indeed a waste of talent to stay in the outer sect. So I thought about taking you in as my apprentice. Before he could finish his words, he heard a thump. Xin Yun had already knelt down and bowed her head. Master, please accept my disciple's greetings. After worshipping, he found that the flame that he intended to use for attack was still in his palm. So he quickly put it away and gave Yang Qi a simple smile. Yang Qi. She was silent for a long time before she spoke softly. Just listen to me. Okay, master. Xin Yun looked very well behaved. Since I want to take you in as my disciple, I've learned about you first through other people's words. I like the sect master's disciple Yu Qinan, so I sent all my cultivation resources to him. I also processed the spiritual materials to save up spiritual stones to give to Yu Qinan. So, what I heard about you is that you are ignorant, overestimating your own abilities, and shameless. As Yang Qi was speaking, he saw Xin Yun supporting herself with her hands and slowly standing up. He even reached out and brushed the dust off his knees. Yang Qi stopped talking and asked back. What do you mean? Xin Yun said with a smile. It seems that the peak master doesn't have a very good impression of me. Coincidentally, I also think that we are not a good match. Yang Qi looked down from her face, and after a moment's pause, he realized what was wrong with her. Then he laughed. I did not have a good impression, so after asking, I gave up the idea of accepting a disciple. However, I happened to be at Alchemy Peak today and watched a challenge match. I thank you. Plop. Xin Yun knelt down again. Yang Qi tilted his head and smiled. His smile was very official. What's going on here? Xin Yun's serious face. It's okay, I just think this posture is good, master, please continue. The scene suddenly became quiet. Yang Qi looked at Xin Yun and stopped talking, as if he was doubting whether his decision was correct. I always feel that it is particularly unreliable. The atmosphere remained in this stagnant state for a long time, until Xin Yun could no longer kneel and moved her legs. Yang Qi spoke again. With spiritual power that has the property of purification, you should have made great achievements in refining equipment. I guess you chose to process spiritual materials in one of your jobs because you intended to go down this path. So I'm giving you a chance to choose between the two, Yu Qinan or refining equipment. Xin Yun blinked. Master, I once heard a saying that only children make choices, while adults all. No. All right. Xin Yun got up from the ground again. Thank you for your appreciation, Peak Master, but I choose senior brother Yu. Yang Qi narrowed his eyes. Are you sure? Sure. Why? Xin Yun raised her head, keeping it at 45 degrees, and sighed softly. Because love has the magic power to make people give up everything. It is a force that I cannot resist. I am willing to do it. Okay. Yang Qi stood up from the bed and walked towards the door. But he stopped when passing by Xin Yun. Come to the weapon refining peak tomorrow to find me. I will help you arrange accommodation. Okay, Ho. Xin Yun answered subconsciously, then realized something was wrong and looked over with a confused look on her face. Yang Qi curled his lips and chuckled. A stupid obsession is different from a sane obsession. Xin Yun became solemn in an instant. Yes, master. What you said is very good. But master, I may need to wait for a while before heading to the weapon refining peak. I have a few small things to do here. Yang Qi raised his eyebrows. Is it the person who just came in? Right. Okay, master understands. As Yang Qi spoke, he took out two jewelry-like spiritual artifacts, a pair of dark green earrings and a white jade ring. Pass it to Xin Yun. The earrings are for attack, and the ring is for defense. They are both level 4 and can store energy in advance for use in battle. Xin Yun took it with both hands. Disciple thanks master. Yang Qi waved his hand. Practice well, your master is leaving. As he spoke, he took a step forward and disappeared. Xin Yun stood up straight, looked at the two spiritual weapons in her hands, and smiled. However, a dark green light flashed, and Arlu returned to human form. He said with a troubled look on his face. Yun, I think I've seen her. Chapter 28 Invisible Thread. Huh? Xin Yun came back to her senses from the surprise of getting a cheap master and two spiritual weapons for free, and looked at Arlu. Arlu frowned, looking as if she was trying hard to recall something. So she waited a while before asking. Do you remember anything? Arlu shook her head, raised her hand and scratched her hair, saying unhappily. I can't remember anything. So that's it. Xin Yun thought for a moment. Then try to remember where you were before you came back with me. Alu's expression was blank for a while, as if she saw something. It seems like I'm staying anywhere. Xin Yun narrowed her eyes. He walked forward and pulled her to sit on the chair. Well, I have a rough guess about your previous situation. I say, follow my thoughts and recall, and let's try it again. Good. Alu nodded obediently. Before you came to me, you didn't know anything about human affairs or human language, so I guess you probably didn't have a complete consciousness before. It makes sense that he was not fully conscious and acted in a daze, leaving no clear memories. As for a little ghost without complete consciousness, or a wandering soul, even if the cultivators of the Xianling sect discovered it, they would probably not bother to take action. That's why you were able to stay and wander around in this sect relying on your instincts. During this process, you unconsciously met many people in the sect, including the head of the weapon refining peak, Yang Qi. Then, he met me a few days ago, and his consciousness awakened and he became himself. Xin Yun spoke slowly while observing the changes in Alu's expression. There were two places where her expression was different. One is the Xianling sect, the other is the refining peak. Xin Yun was confused when suddenly her eyes blurred. A feeling of sadness welled up in her heart and she saw a scene. On a rainy night, on a messy battlefield, a man half kneeling with exhaustion, and a broken umbrella beside him. The next moment, the picture disappeared, and the scene in front of Xin Yun turned back into her own little house. Umbrella. That umbrella. Yun, what's wrong with you? Alu spoke anxiously and shook Xin Yun's hand. You look so pale, are you feeling unwell? Yun, don't scare me. Xin Yun said nothing. She was wrong from the beginning. Alu might not be a wandering ghost, but a spirit of an object. The spirit of an umbrella. She looked at Alu's nervous and innocent appearance, and seemed to feel that sadness again. Desperate, suffocating sadness. But why did she suddenly see that picture? Was it real? Where did it come from? Xin Yun slowly stopped. In her perception, there seemed to be an invisible thread connecting Alu, and endless sadness flowed along the thread. It seemed that she was able to see the scene because of this line. Xin Yun felt it carefully and found that this invisible line was not the connection established between her and Alu, but appeared out of thin air. Alu's crying brought Xin Yun back to her senses, and she spoke quickly. I'm fine, don't worry, but you? Alu shook her head vigorously. I don't remember it anymore. Arlu has Yun now, and I'm already very happy. I don't need to think about the past anymore. She showed a brilliant smile to Xin Yun, with tears in the corners of her eyes. Xin Yun was silent. Then he said softly. Okay, I won't remember it. If the past represents sadness and pain, then remembering it is not necessarily a good thing. It would be better to wait until she is strong enough to deal with everything, and then find out the identity of Alu and that scene. I believe that by then, she will also know whether she should let Alu remember it. Xin Yun took a deep breath and stopped worrying. Take Alu to the bed. She sat cross-legged in meditation, giving the Xianling Ju critical strike version a more convenient position to operate, and let Alu lean beside her to absorb the scattered spiritual power. Alu's story is just an episode. But it also calmed her down from her excitement and made her recall some information she had just learned from Master Yang Qi. Yang Qi discovered that her spiritual power was different and guessed that she had a special physique, which had already happened before she came in. If the original story had developed, without Yu Chenan's challenge, Yang Qi would not have changed his opinion of her, nor would he have accepted her as his disciple. She herself was unaware of this and continued with her life. Later, she met the number 1 swordsman, Mu Rui, and was accepted as his apprentice. The original text did not give details about her becoming an apprentice, but the approximate time was within the next month. Then, she stayed with Mu Rui for 3 months, and only reappeared in public after Mu Rui officially announced that he would accept her as his disciple. At that time, the hero had been in trouble and was in dire straits, and she stepped on him without hesitation, fulfilling her duties as a villain conscientiously. Well, let us not talk about this for now, and just talk about Mu Rui. Yang Qi was able to discover that her physique was special, and this number 1 sword cultivator was even stronger. Could he also discover it? Was this the real reason why Mu Rui, the real boss, accepted her as a disciple with 3 spiritual roots? Seems reasonable. But during these days of practice, Xin Yun could clearly feel that her practice speed was gradually increasing with the awakening of her special physique. Even without the system, my progress in strength should not be inferior to that of an ordinary genius. The self in the original text has also awakened, so the feeling of the speed of cultivation should be no different from now. Then why was it that when the male protagonist left the sect for 10 years and returned again, her cultivation level was just at the foundation stage? Even if it was a true 3 spiritual roots person, a person with average talent, after 10 years, relying solely on the accumulation of resources, should not have only this much cultivation. And she is also blessed with a special physique. The more Xin Yun thought about it, the more she felt that there was a big problem here. She even had a feeling, isn't the identity of the disciple of the number 1 swordsman in the cultivation world a big trap? However, Mu Rui has a very good reputation and is admired by many disciples in the sect. Mu Rui's eldest disciple Lin Zizhua, whom he met before, also seems like a good person. And Alu, which scene was the battlefield in just now? When was it? Who is that man? What is his relationship with Alu? Besides, what was that line? Why did it appear out of nowhere? Why could she sense emotions through that line? And why could she see images? I said I didn't want to, but I was curious and my brain started to get out of control. So why not think about it? Xin Yun took a deep breath and began to think carefully. The first 2 things, the information is missing, and there is no way to find the truth for the time being. Xin Yun turned her head to look at Alu and sensed her carefully. That line is no longer there. Well, there is no way to figure this out. Xin Yun stared at the roof blankly for a while. Afterwards, he took out the audio-visual simulation space, input the magic to control water, and let his spiritual consciousness enter into it. There is no use thinking too much, just work hard. After all, whether it was Alu's matter or Mu Rui, it didn't seem like she could handle it at the Qi training stage. Chapter 29, Village and Dog Demon. Time flies, and more than 10 days passed quickly during the practice. Xin Yun finally waited for Li Qing to come to her house. It was on a cloudy morning. Brother Wu and the others should have arrived at the mission hall by now, looking for suitable missions. Xiao Yun, please sort them out. Except for the disciple token, you are required to bring everything else. Then we go to the mission hall, register for the mission, and we can set off. Xin Yun agreed. After a quick tidying up, he left the residential area with Li Qing. In order to facilitate the disciples, the sect set up a mission hall at the foot of each main peak. The place Xin Yun and the other person went to was the one at the foot of the sect master peak. The journey was uneventful, and there was no more attention than the last time I went out. After all, the world does not revolve around one person. It was natural that her and Yu Chenan's affairs were forgotten more than 10 days ago. Occasionally, someone would recognize her, just glance at her quietly, remind their companions, and then there would be no further contact. Xin Yun was happy and free. When I arrived at the mission hall, I saw many people coming in and out. Some were obviously experienced and were quite comfortable in their actions. Others, like Xin Yun and the others, were here for the first time to take on a mission and looked excited and nervous. Li Qing led the way, pulling Xin Yun into the mission hall. She looked around and then set her sights on the 3 male disciples. They were all under 20 years old, one was tall, one was fat, and the other was of normal build, but looking at their faces, they all had unfriendly expressions. When Li Qing discovered these 3 people who were paying attention to the door also discovered them. Xin Yun could clearly feel that the 3 men's eyes were on her, with scrutiny and greed. She was speechless. Isn't this trap too obvious? She forced herself to act innocent and gullible and followed Li Qing. Come on, Xiao Yun, let me introduce you. This is senior brother Wu Jian, this is senior brother Yu Yoheng, and this is senior brother Zhang Gongzhang. Xin Yun matched them up, they are normal body shape, fat and tall. So he smiled and spoke. Hello, 3 brothers. Li Qing turned around and introduced Xin Yun to the 3 of them. This is my little sister, Xin Yun. What is she like? Isn't she pretty? Hello, junior sister Xin. Junior sister Xin is so pretty. Wu Jian, who was obviously the leader, smiled, as if trying to make himself look friendlier. Since the two junior sisters are here, shall we just accept the mission and set off? Good. Li Qing agreed immediately and then asked, "What mission did you choose, brothers? I have to tell you in advance. This is the first time for Xin Yun and I to go on a mission. We don't understand many things. You can't take on a mission that is too difficult. Don't worry, junior sister. The mission is very simple, but it's a bit far from the sect." Wu Jian said this and walked towards the place where he would receive the task. Xin Yun and others followed, and after handing over the disciple tokens, they successfully received the task. After getting the disciple token back, Xin Yun probed his spiritual sense into it and examined it carefully. Their mission location is in a place called Zhaojiao village, and the mission objective is to deal with a dog demon that has killed several villagers. According to the description of the situation received, the dog demon was not very powerful and killed people only when the villagers were alone. The villagers united to fight against it and injured the dog demon, but the dog demon was fast and escaped. After that, it popped up from time to time and wreaked havoc on the village. They run away when they see a lot of people, and come when they see a few people, making the villagers miserable. They have no choice but to seek help from the higher authorities. It's a bit of a stretch to call this dog a monster, so the mission is naturally not difficult. No one else took the job simply because Zhaojiao village was located in a remote area, far away from the sect. The time and energy wasted going back and forth was not worth it considering the small reward for the mission. However, Xin Yun didn't care whether it was a mission or not, and the others didn't care either. It's all just to find an excuse. There were 5 people in the group, each with their own thoughts. After leaving the mission hall, he rented a spirit bird for transportation and hurried on his way. The spiritual bird is called Bu Peng. It is not very powerful and has only been able to refine qi. However, it has a huge body and a broad back, so it is very stable to sit on it. The only thing is that the flying speed is a little slow, but compared with other advantages, this floor is nothing. Xin Yun had no intention of talking to these people. After Bu Peng was on the road steadily, she sat cross-legged and let the spiritual power in her body move on its own. Seeing her like this, the others didn't come up to talk to her. Bu Peng flew from morning to evening, a whole day, before finally landing. Wu Jian jumped off the bird's back, stretched his body, and looked at the village road ahead. "We're here, everyone come down. Let's go into the village to rest tonight and ask the villagers for information about the dog demon. We'll take action tomorrow." They had been sitting for a whole day and felt sore and not in good shape, so they agreed to this arrangement. Led by Wu Jian, the group walked into the village. At first glance, there was no one around. Everyone had no choice but to move forward. After passing by several houses, I found that not only was no one home, but there was also a thin layer of dust on the items inside. It seems like it has been a few days. Xin Yun frowned and quickened his pace with the others. Finally, he saw a figure outside a larger courtyard. A sturdy young man squatted at the gate of the courtyard, his expression full of worry. Seeing someone coming, the sturdy young man stood up, took a few glances at the uniforms of Xin Yun and others, and suddenly realized. He turned around and ran into the yard. "Village chief! Village chief! Quick, quick, the immortal sect is coming! The immortal sect is coming!" Seeing this, the group no longer rushed forward and stood at the door and waited. After a while, an old man with grey hair came out with a cane. When he looked at Xin Yun and others, his eyes were filled with excitement. "All the immortals are finally here. They are finally here." The cane tapped the ground rapidly. The old man came forward, dropped his walking stick, grabbed Wu Jian's hands, and shook them up and down excitedly. Master, you must save us. Our entire village has been harmed by that dog demon. We don't even dare to go out." As he spoke, the old man's eyes became moist. "It's been half a month. We dare not separate, dare not be alone, and can only gather here. We can't do anything. If we continue like this, once the food runs out, I'm afraid we won't be able to survive." As the old man cried, some of the villagers behind him couldn't help but feel sad and sobbed. Wu Jian frowned and pulled his hand away with a bad tone. "Don't worry, it's just a dog demon. We can deal with it tomorrow. As soon as he finished speaking, a disheveled woman rushed out from behind the villagers. With a crazy look on his face, he pounced on Wu Jian. He's dead, dead, they killed him, I killed him, it was me, har har har, everyone is going to die, everyone is going to die, no one can escape, har har har.